The land remembers far more than written records can preserve. Within soaring canyon walls, weathered cliff dwellings, sacred earthworks, and enduring petroglyphs lie enduring traces of cultures whose achievements continue to challenge modern interpretation. Archaeological discoveries, oral traditions, and unresolved evidence reveal a past rich with complexity, where certainty often gives way to careful investigation. The wind moves steadily through the valley, carrying little more than the sound of grass brushing against weathered sandstone. Towering cliffs rise above the Milk River in what is now southern Alberta, Canada, their pale surfaces marked by thousands of carvings and paintings created over many centuries. At first glance, the cliffs appear almost ordinary, shaped only by erosion and time. Yet, a closer look reveals an immense gallery of human expression. Figures of warriors, bison, horses, spiritual beings, handprints, geometric patterns, and scenes from everyday life cover the stone, transforming the landscape into one of the largest collections of indigenous rock art in North America. Known today as writing on stone, or Aisinipi in the language of the Blackfoot people, the site has long been regarded as a place of exceptional cultural and spiritual importance. For countless generations, Blackfoot communities traveled through this valley, not simply as visitors, but as participants in traditions deeply connected to the cliffs themselves. The sandstone formations were believed to possess spiritual significance, serving as places where individuals sought visions, guidance, and communication with powerful forces that shaped both nature and human life. Archaeologists estimate that many of the carvings date back hundreds of years, while some paintings may be considerably older. The arrival of horses after European contact added a new chapter to the artwork, allowing researchers to identify approximate time periods based on changing imagery. Earlier, carvings often depict hunters armed with bows and spears, while later panels feature mounted warriors carrying firearms. Together, the rock art forms an extraordinary visual timeline, documenting centuries of cultural adaptation without the use of written language. Unlike monuments built from carefully cut stone, these images remain exposed to rain, frost, sunlight, and wind. Many have faded almost beyond recognition, while others remain remarkably sharp despite centuries of natural weathering. This uneven preservation has puzzled researchers. Differences in mineral composition, the depth of engravings, and the protective qualities of certain rock surfaces offer practical explanations, yet some particularly well-preserved figures continue to stand out in ways that invite further investigation. Interpreting the artwork presents an even greater challenge. Certain scenes are relatively straightforward, illustrating hunts, battles, or ceremonies that fit well within established knowledge of Plains cultures. Others are far less clear. Human-like figures appear with exaggerated features or elaborate headdresses unlike anything commonly found in surviving historical records. Some seem surrounded by radiating lines or unusual shapes that resist simple classification. Are these symbolic representations of spiritual experiences, artistic expressions of dreams and visions, or visual traditions whose meanings have gradually disappeared as languages and cultural practices changed over time? For Blackfoot knowledge keepers, many of these images were never intended as historical records in the modern sense. Instead, they represented deeply personal encounters with the spiritual world, preserving experiences that could not easily be explained through ordinary language. Vision quests, ceremonial practices, and sacred narratives all played a role in shaping the landscape's meaning. From this perspective, attempting to interpret every carving through archaeology alone may overlook the cultural framework that originally gave each image its purpose. Researchers have also noticed recurring symbols appearing throughout different sections of the valley. Similar geometric designs, animal forms, and ceremonial motifs emerge repeatedly, sometimes separated by considerable distances. Some scholars argue that these repeated symbols reflect shared religious traditions maintained over generations. Others suggest they may represent territorial markers, family identities, or important seasonal gathering places. Because no accompanying written explanation survives, each possibility remains open to discussion. One particularly intriguing aspect of writing on stone is the relationship between the carvings and the landscape itself. Many images appear deliberately positioned beside naturally sculpted pillars, caves, or narrow passages through the cliffs. Certain rock formations cast dramatic shadows at sunrise or sunset, briefly altering the appearance of nearby figures. Whether these placements were chosen purely for practical reasons or held ceremonial significance continues to be debated. The surrounding environment seems less like a backdrop and more like an active participant in the artistic design. Fringe theories occasionally move far beyond archaeological evidence. Some writers have proposed that unusual figures depict encounters with unknown visitors or preserve memories of events outside conventional history. Others claim the carvings encode astronomical knowledge or forgotten systems of communication extending across the Great Plains. These ideas have attracted public curiosity, yet no convincing evidence has emerged to support such interpretations. Even so, the persistence of these theories reflects the remarkable ability of the site to inspire questions that remain difficult to answer. Today, writing on stone stands not only as an archaeological treasure, but also as a living cultural landscape where indigenous traditions continue to shape understanding of the past. Every carving reflects a deliberate act by someone who stood before these same cliffs, looking at the same river and the same endless prairie sky. Yet, despite decades of careful research, countless symbols remain unexplained, their original meanings carried away by time. The sandstone continues to preserve its silent record, inviting each generation to study its markings while reminding us that some stories may still lie beyond our ability to fully understand. Yet even after examining landscapes where stone itself became a record of memory, another place invites us to consider a different kind of enduring question. Far to the south, among the rugged mountains of what is now southwestern Colorado, a solitary ridge rises toward the sky. At its summit stand two towering sandstone spires known as Chimney Rock, their distinctive silhouettes visible for miles across the surrounding valleys. Nestled below these natural landmarks rests one of the most intriguing settlements associated with the ancestral Pueblo people, a place where architecture, astronomy, and ceremony appear to converge in ways that continue to inspire careful investigation. The Chimney Rock. Great House occupies a commanding position more than 7,000 feet above sea level. Unlike many larger Pueblo communities built along rivers or broad mesas, this settlement seems intentionally placed in a location that demanded considerable effort to reach. Steep slopes surround the complex, and transporting construction materials to the summit would have required remarkable organization and determination. The decision to build here suggests that practical convenience may not have been the only consideration. Archaeological evidence indicates that the site flourished primarily during the 11th century, particularly between approximately AD 1070 and 1090. During this period, builders erected a substantial Great House, along with ceremonial structures known as Great Kivas. The masonry displays the characteristic precision seen throughout the broader Chacuan world, linking Chimney Rock to an extensive cultural network that stretched across much of the American Southwest. For many years, researchers debated the site's primary purpose. Was it a permanent community where families lived throughout the year, or was it a ceremonial destination visited only during specific seasons? Excavations have uncovered relatively few domestic structures compared with other Pueblo settlements of similar importance. This imbalance has led many archaeologists to propose that Chimney Rock functioned less as an ordinary village and more as a regional center for ritual gatherings, political meetings, or important religious events. The surrounding landscape strengthens this possibility. From the summit, sweeping views extend across forests, valleys, and distant mountain ranges. The setting evokes a deliberate relationship between architecture and the natural world. Rather than dominating the landscape, the buildings appear carefully integrated into it, almost as though the location itself carried a significance understood by those who chose it centuries ago. One of the site's most discussed features involves the moon. Astronomers and archaeologists have observed that every 18.6 years, during what is known as the major lunar standstill, the rising moon appears between the twin sandstone pinnacles when viewed from carefully selected locations within the settlement. This rare celestial event results from the slow wobble of the moon's orbit and would have been noticeable only through generations of careful observation. Was this alignment intentional? Many scholars believe it was. The timing corresponds closely with the period of greatest construction activity at Chimney Rock. If this interpretation is correct, the builders possess not only impressive engineering skills, but also a sophisticated understanding of long-term astronomical cycles. Such knowledge would likely have required centuries of accumulated observation, carefully passed from one generation to the next. Not everyone agrees that astronomy alone explains the site's importance. Some researchers caution that alignments can occasionally emerge by chance, particularly within landscapes filled with prominent natural features. They argue that while the lunar connection is compelling, it should be considered alongside evidence for social organization, trade, ceremonial practice, and regional politics rather than viewed in isolation. Even so, the relationship between the architecture and the heavens remains difficult to ignore. Similar astronomical orientations appear at several Chaquin sites, suggesting that celestial events may have played a meaningful role in ritual life. Whether these observations served practical calendars, reinforced religious traditions, or symbolized broader cosmological beliefs remains an active area of study. The Great House also raises questions about the broader Chaquin network itself. Construction materials, pottery styles, and architectural techniques closely resemble those found hundreds of miles away in Chaco Canyon. Such similarities imply sustained communication between distant communities across challenging terrain. How were these connections maintained? Did travelers regularly cross deserts and mountains carrying ideas as well as goods? Or did spiritual traditions unite settlements separated by vast distances? Fringe interpretations occasionally push these questions much further. Some writers have suggested that the site's celestial alignments point to knowledge acquired from unknown sources or represent evidence of an advanced scientific tradition that has largely disappeared. Others propose that Chimney Rock formed part of an immense sacred landscape whose full design can no longer be reconstructed. These ideas remain speculative, supported more by interpretation than by archaeological evidence. Yet they reflect the enduring fascination inspired by the settlement's unusual location and remarkable precision. Today, the winds still move quietly between the sandstone towers, just as they did nearly 1,000 years ago. Visitors standing near the Great House often find themselves looking upward, following the same horizon once watched by its builders. Whether they gathered to observe the moon, conduct ceremonies, strengthen alliances, or fulfill purposes now beyond recovery, the people who built Chimney Rock left behind a place that continues to resist complete explanation. The stones remain silent, while the mountain waits patiently for whatever pieces of its story may still lie beyond our reach. As the questions surrounding Chimney Rock gradually fade into the distance, another landscape presents an even older puzzle, one etched not into towering walls or ceremonial buildings, but into isolated boulders resting beside the dry shoreline of an ancient lake. Here, in the high desert of what is now northwestern Nevada, weathered volcanic rocks bear carefully carved designs whose age may place them among the earliest known examples of rock art in North America. The Winnemucca Lake petroglyphs offer no written explanation, no accompanying settlement, and no clear account of the people who first created them. Instead, they leave behind only patterns, symbols, and enduring uncertainty. The setting itself feels almost timeless. Today, Winnemucca Lake is largely dry, its broad basin reflecting a climate far different from the one that existed thousands of years ago. During the end of the last ice age, however, this region formed part of an immense prehistoric lake system known as Lake Lahontan. Vast stretches of fresh water once covered much of western Nevada, supporting abundant wildlife and creating an environment that attracted early human communities long before recorded history. Scattered among the exposed limestone outcrops are deeply engraved geometric figures unlike the more recognizable images found at many rock art sites. Instead of animals, hunters, or human forms, the carvings consist primarily of complex patterns. Long grooves intersect with circles, branching lines, diamond shapes, zigzags, and abstract motifs arranged with deliberate precision. Some appear almost architectural in their symmetry, while others seem entirely symbolic, offering no obvious connection to everyday life. For decades, archaeologists struggled to determine when these petroglyphs were created. Dating rock carvings directly is exceptionally difficult because the stone itself cannot easily reveal when its surface was engraved. Researchers instead examined the geological history of the surrounding lake basin. Some of the carved rocks appear to have been submerged for thousands of years before gradually becoming exposed again as ancient waters receded. Based on this evidence, several studies have proposed that at least some of the engravings may date back as far as 10,500 to nearly 15,000 years ago, making them potentially older than almost any other known petroglyphs on the continent. Such estimates remain the subject of ongoing scientific discussion, and not every specialist agrees on the precise chronology. Nevertheless, even more conservative interpretations place the carvings among the earliest surviving expressions of symbolic human activity in North America. The question that follows is perhaps even more intriguing than their age. What do these symbols represent? Unlike later indigenous rock art that often depicts recognizable animals, ceremonies, or historical events, the Winnemucca carvings resist straightforward interpretation. No universally accepted explanation has emerged, despite decades of careful study. Some archaeologists suggest the patterns served ceremonial purposes connected with water, seasonal cycles, or spiritual beliefs tied to the changing landscape. Others believe they may have functioned as territorial markers or gathering points for early communities living along the shores of Lake Lahontan. There is also the possibility that the carvings formed part of a symbolic language now completely lost. Human societies have long communicated through visual systems that leave little trace beyond the marks themselves. Without accompanying artifacts or surviving oral traditions directly linked to the site, reconstructing that symbolic vocabulary becomes extraordinarily difficult. Every interpretation remains provisional, built upon comparison rather than certainty. The environment adds another layer to the puzzle. When the engravings were first made, many of these rocks likely stood close to the water's edge. Reflections from the lake would have altered their appearance throughout the day, while changing water levels may have concealed or revealed different sections over time. Were the carvings intended to interact with sunlight and water in meaningful ways? Could certain designs have been visible only during particular seasons or environmental conditions? Some researchers have explored whether repeated geometric arrangements reflect observations of natural cycles rather than artistic decoration alone. Similar, abstract motifs appear at rock art sites elsewhere in the world, prompting comparisons that range from independent cultural development to shared psychological responses among early human communities. While these similarities are fascinating, they provide no direct evidence of cultural connection. Parallel ideas can emerge in very different societies separated by immense distances and thousands of years. As often happens with sites whose purpose remains uncertain, more speculative theories have also appeared. Some writers have suggested that the petroglyphs encode astronomical knowledge preserved from a much earlier age. Others propose they represent maps, mathematical systems, or traces of an advanced culture that existed before the end of the Ice Age. These interpretations extend well beyond the available archaeological evidence, yet they continue to attract attention because the carvings themselves refuse to fit comfortably within familiar categories. Even after generations of investigation, the Winnemucca Lake petroglyphs remain remarkably quiet in what they choose to reveal. The hands that carved these intricate designs disappeared many thousands of years ago, leaving only carefully incised stone exposed once again after ancient waters withdrew. Whether the symbols recorded beliefs, observations, ceremonies, or ideas that no longer survive, they continue to remind us that some of humanity's earliest voices still speak in forms we have yet to fully understand. The geometric carvings of Winnemucca Lake remind us that not every message carved into stone can still be read. Yet, farther south, another landscape preserves evidence that is far more tangible. Here, the stones do not merely bear symbols, they form homes, carefully built into the walls of a deep canyon where generations once lived, worked, and watched the changing seasons. Even so, the reasons these communities flourished, adapted, and eventually departed remain subjects of continuing investigation. Walnut Canyon cuts through the rugged plateau of what is now northern Arizona, its limestone cliffs descending hundreds of feet below the surrounding pine forests. From above, the canyon appears quiet and almost inaccessible. Only after following its winding rim does the true character of the landscape emerge. Natural alcoves line the canyon walls, formed over countless centuries, as softer layers of limestone gradually eroded away. Within these sheltered recesses stand carefully constructed masonry dwellings, their stone walls blending almost seamlessly with the cliff itself. The people who built these homes are commonly associated with the Sinagua culture, a society that occupied parts of central and northern Arizona for several centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests that Walnut Canyon was inhabited most intensively between approximately AD 1100 and 1250. During this period, dozens of families established communities within the protective alcoves, constructing rooms from locally gathered limestone and mortar while taking advantage of the canyon's unique environment. At first glance, the location seems unusual. Building homes halfway down steep canyon walls required tremendous effort. Every stone, wooden beam, basket of food, and container of water had to be carried along narrow ledges or down difficult trails. Yet, the canyon also offered significant advantages. The overhanging cliffs shielded the dwellings from rain, snow, and intense summer sunlight while helping maintain relatively stable temperatures throughout the year. Nearby springs and seasonal streams supported farming on the canyon floor and surrounding terraces, allowing residents to cultivate corn, beans, and squash despite the challenging terrain. The architecture reflects thoughtful planning rather than improvisation. Individual rooms served different purposes, including sleeping areas, storage spaces, and places for daily activities. Doorways were intentionally narrow, conserving warmth during cold winters while providing structural stability. Smoke-blackened ceilings still preserve traces of ancient cooking fires, creating a direct connection to ordinary moments of life that unfolded nearly 1,000 years ago. Even with these practical explanations, Walnut Canyon raises enduring questions. Why choose this particular landscape when seemingly easier places were available nearby? Protection from hostile groups is often suggested as one answer. Cliff dwellings naturally limited access, allowing residents to monitor anyone approaching through the canyon. Yet, archaeological evidence indicates that the region experienced periods of both cooperation and competition among neighboring communities. Defensive concerns may have influenced settlement decisions, but they likely formed only one part of a much larger picture. Environmental adaptation offers another possibility. The canyon creates a series of microclimates where temperatures, moisture levels, and vegetation differ noticeably from the surrounding plateau. Such conditions may have extended growing seasons or provided dependable resources during periods of drought. As climate patterns shifted throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, communities across the American Southwest were forced to adapt to changing rainfall and agricultural conditions. Walnut Canyon may represent one response to these environmental pressures. Trade also appears to have played an important role. Excavations have uncovered seashells from the Pacific coast, colorful macaw feathers originating far to the south, and finely crafted pottery from distant Pueblo communities. These discoveries reveal that Walnut Canyon was not an isolated settlement, but part of an extensive network linking cultures across hundreds of miles. Ideas, materials, technologies, and ceremonial traditions likely traveled alongside merchants and travelers moving through the region. Yet perhaps the greatest mystery concerns what happened after the middle of the 13th century. By around AD 1250, the cliff dwellings were gradually abandoned. There is little evidence of widespread violence or catastrophic destruction. Instead, the departure appears to have occurred over time, with families relocating to larger communities elsewhere in the Southwest. Changing climate, declining agricultural productivity, shifting trade routes, and evolving political alliances have all been proposed as contributing factors. Rather than a single dramatic event, the transition may have reflected generations of gradual change. Still, important uncertainties remain. Why did some settlements expand while others were left behind? What conversations took place among community leaders as they decided whether to remain or move? How much of their cultural knowledge continued through descendant Pueblo peoples, and how much has inevitably faded with time? More speculative interpretations occasionally emerge as well. Some writers suggest the canyon's orientation carried astronomical significance, or that certain alcoves were reserved for ceremonial observations linked to seasonal events. Others propose that the placement of specific structures reflects sacred patterns no longer fully understood. While archaeology has identified evidence of ritual life throughout the broader Pueblo world, direct proof for these particular claims at Walnut Canyon remains limited. Today, the narrow paths winding beneath the limestone overhangs still lead visitors past doorways that open onto empty rooms overlooking the canyon below. Birds nest where families once gathered around evening fires, and sunlight continues to move slowly across the same stone walls that sheltered generations of skilled builders. Their homes endure with remarkable resilience, but the decisions that shaped this community, and ultimately transformed it, remain only partly visible, inviting us to consider how much of the human story can survive in stone, and how much quietly disappears with those who once called these cliffs home. The quiet rooms of Walnut Canyon suggest that entire communities can disappear without leaving behind a clear explanation. Yet, not every enduring puzzle is built of stone alone. A short distance away, nature itself created a place that has drawn human attention for centuries. A deep pool of crystal-clear water emerging from the earth with remarkable consistency, sustaining life in an otherwise demanding landscape. Here, geology and history meet in ways that continue to invite careful study. Montezuma Well lies within central Arizona, appearing almost unexpectedly among rolling hills covered with sycamore, mesquite, and desert shrubs. From above, it resembles a perfectly formed oasis, a nearly circular limestone sinkhole measuring roughly 400 feet across and filled with brilliantly blue-green water. Steep cliffs surround the basin, giving the impression of a secluded world isolated from the landscape beyond its rim. Despite its peaceful appearance, Montezuma Well is unlike almost any other natural spring in North America. It is not fed by rivers or rainfall flowing across the surface. Instead, water rises continuously from underground through deep fractures in the limestone, releasing more than 1 million gallons every day. The supply remains astonishingly constant throughout the year, even during prolonged periods of drought. Scientists attribute this remarkable stability to an extensive underground aquifer that slowly channels groundwater through ancient geological formations before it emerges inside the basin. Yet, the water presents an unexpected contradiction. Although it appears exceptionally clear, it contains unusually high concentrations of dissolved carbon dioxide and naturally occurring arsenic. Fish introduced into the well cannot survive for long, and many familiar aquatic species are entirely absent. Instead, the ecosystem supports several tiny organisms found nowhere else on Earth, including unique species of amphipods, water scorpions, and leeches that have evolved in remarkable isolation. The well functions almost as a biological island, where life has adapted to conditions that would prove hostile elsewhere. Long before modern geology explained these unusual characteristics, indigenous peoples recognized the importance of the site. Archaeological evidence indicates that humans occupied the surrounding area for well over 1,000 years. The Sinagua people, whose communities extended throughout central Arizona, established dwellings along the rim and carefully engineered irrigation canals that carried water from the well into nearby agricultural fields. Portions of these canals remain visible today, demonstrating an impressive understanding of hydraulic engineering that allowed crops to flourish despite the region's dry climate. The engineering itself raises important questions. How did the builders determine that water emerging from such an unusual spring could safely sustain agriculture while remaining unsuitable for drinking in large quantities? Through generations of careful observation, they appear to have developed practical knowledge of the well's unique properties. Their irrigation system distributed water efficiently across the landscape, transforming a naturally occurring geological feature into the center of a productive farming community. Beyond its practical value, Montezuma Well also held profound cultural significance. Oral traditions preserved by several indigenous communities describe the spring as a place connected with origins, emergence, and renewal. For some groups, it formed part of sacred narratives explaining humanity's relationship with the natural world. These traditions emphasize the well not simply as a source of water, but as a place where the physical and spiritual landscapes intersected in meaningful ways. Such beliefs naturally invite further reflection. Was the selection of this location based solely on its reliable water supply? Or did its unusual appearance and behavior inspire deeper ceremonial importance? The nearly circular basin, its constant outflow, and its striking isolation create an environment unlike most natural springs in the Southwest. Even today, standing beside its rim, it is easy to understand why earlier communities viewed the site with particular reverence. Scientific investigation continues to reveal additional complexities. Divers have explored portions of the underwater passages feeding the well, but the complete structure of the subterranean system remains only partly understood. Visibility decreases rapidly within the deeper channels, while narrow openings and unstable geology limit exploration. Hydrologists have developed increasingly sophisticated models of the underground aquifer, yet the precise pathways traveled by the water over many miles remain difficult to map with complete confidence. As often happens at sites where natural phenomena appear unusual, more speculative interpretations have emerged over the years. Some writers have proposed that Montezuma Well possessed ceremonial astronomical significance, serving as a focal point for observations linked to seasonal cycles. Others suggest that its seemingly endless water source inspired traditions that later evolved into stories of sacred portals or places of emergence. These ideas remain difficult to verify archaeologically, but they reflect the enduring influence the spring has exercised over those who encounter it. Today, the water continues its uninterrupted journey from deep within the earth, just as it has for thousands of years. Ancient irrigation canals still trace the surrounding hillsides, while the limestone walls quietly preserve evidence of generations who depended upon this extraordinary place. Modern science has explained much about its geology and ecology, yet Montezuma Well continues to balance comfortably between explanation and wonder. It remains a landscape where natural processes, human ingenuity, and enduring tradition converge, leaving us to consider whether its most meaningful story lies not in what has already been discovered, but in what still waits beneath the surface. The enduring waters of Montezuma Well remind us that some places sustain life through remarkable natural forces. Yet, farther across the high desert of the American Southwest, another landscape preserves a different legacy, one shaped not by flowing springs, but by towering sandstone cliffs that offered both protection and possibility. Within one immense natural alcove rests Betatakin, a settlement whose remarkable construction continues to raise questions about the people who built it, the choices they made, and the reasons they eventually walked away. Hidden deep within Sigi Canyon in what is now northeastern Arizona, Betatakin remains almost invisible until the canyon suddenly opens before the viewer. The settlement occupies a vast rock shelter carved naturally into the cliff face, where hundreds of feet of sandstone rise overhead like an enormous ceiling. From a distance, the masonry walls seem almost inseparable from the surrounding stone, blending so completely into the landscape that they are easily overlooked. It is only when sunlight reaches the alcove that the outlines of ancient rooms gradually emerge, revealing one of the finest preserved cliff dwellings associated with the ancestral Pueblo people. The name Betatakin comes from the Navajo language and is commonly translated as house built on a ledge. Although the name reflects a later Navajo understanding of the site, the settlement itself was constructed centuries earlier by ancestral Pueblo communities, whose descendants today include several modern Pueblo nations. Archaeological evidence suggests that Betatakin was established during the mid-13th century, around AD 1267, and occupied for only a few decades before it was abandoned near the end of that century. That relatively brief occupation immediately attracts attention. Constructing Betatakin demanded extraordinary effort. The community eventually contained well over 100 rooms, storage chambers, ceremonial spaces, and living quarters carefully arranged across the broad sandstone ledge. Every stone had to be gathered, shaped, and carried into position without modern tools or machinery. Timber beams supporting roofs were transported from distant forests growing on higher mesas, requiring coordinated labor across difficult terrain. Such investment suggests that the builders intended to create a lasting community rather than a temporary refuge. Yet, despite this enormous undertaking, the settlement's active life appears to have lasted little more than a generation. Why would a thriving community invest so much in a place it would soon leave behind? Researchers have explored several explanations. Climate studies indicate that the late 13th century brought significant environmental instability throughout much of the Southwest. Extended droughts reduced agricultural productivity, making reliable food production increasingly difficult. Tree ring analysis, one of archaeology's most valuable dating methods in the region, reveals periods of declining rainfall that would have placed growing pressure on farming communities dependent upon seasonal harvests. The geography of Betatakin reflects both opportunity and limitation. The immense alcove protected homes from harsh weather, while maintaining relatively stable temperatures throughout the year. Springs within the canyon provided dependable water, and nearby terraces supported cultivated crops. At the same time, the surrounding cliffs restricted the amount of arable land available. As populations increased and environmental conditions deteriorated, the balance between available resources and community needs may gradually have shifted. Trade connections reveal that Betatakin was far from isolated. Pottery styles, stone tools, shell ornaments, and other artifacts demonstrate interaction with communities throughout the broader Pueblo world. Ideas, ceremonial traditions, and practical knowledge traveled alongside goods across extensive regional networks. Betatakin participated in a sophisticated cultural landscape that linked settlements separated by deserts, mesas, and mountain ranges. The architecture itself offers additional clues. Many rooms appear carefully organized around shared courtyards, encouraging cooperation within extended families. Storage chambers greatly outnumber spaces devoted solely to daily living, suggesting that preserving food for uncertain seasons was an essential concern. Nearby kivas, subterranean ceremonial structures central to Pueblo religious life, reflect the importance of ritual alongside practical survival. Even with this growing body of evidence, many aspects of Betatakin remain difficult to explain fully. The decision to build within such an immense natural alcove may have carried symbolic meaning beyond simple protection. Throughout the Pueblo world, caves and sheltered rock formations often held ceremonial significance, representing places of emergence, transformation, or connection between the human and spiritual realms. Did the builders choose this dramatic location because it reflected long-established beliefs as well as practical advantages? Archaeology can identify patterns, but it cannot easily reconstruct the conversations or intentions that guided those choices. Some researchers also note the settlement's careful orientation within the canyon. Seasonal sunlight reaches different sections of the alcove throughout the year, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow across the stone walls. While no definitive evidence demonstrates deliberate astronomical design comparable to certain other Pueblo sites, the relationship between architecture and the surrounding landscape continues to invite investigation. Were these changing patterns simply consequences of building within the available space, or did they hold ceremonial significance recognized by those who lived there? More speculative interpretations occasionally extend these questions further. Some writers have proposed that the cliff dwellings formed part of a vast ceremonial network connecting sacred landscapes across the Southwest through alignments and shared cosmological traditions. Others suggest that the dramatic setting preserved knowledge expressed through architecture rather than written language. Such ideas remain difficult to verify and extend beyond the available archaeological evidence, yet they illustrate the powerful impression Betatakin continues to leave upon those who study it. Today, silence fills the great alcove where voices once echoed between sandstone walls. Masonry rooms still stand beneath the sheltering cliff, remarkably intact despite more than 7 centuries of wind, rain, and changing seasons. The families who built this remarkable community left no written account explaining why they arrived or why they departed. Instead, they entrusted their story to stone, timber, and landscape. Those enduring traces continue to invite careful observation, reminding us that even the most impressive achievements can preserve unanswered questions long after their builders have gone. The quiet stone walls of Betatakin reveal how entire communities could flourish within the shelter of towering cliffs before gradually passing into silence. Yet, not every enduring archaeological landscape rises above the ground. Along the shores of rivers, bays, and coastal marshes, another kind of monument slowly took shape over thousands of years. Not built from cut stone or timber, but from countless layers of discarded shells, ash, tools, and traces of daily life. These immense shell mounds appear at first to be simple refuse heaps. Closer examination tells a far more complex story. One of the most remarkable examples stands along the southeastern coast of what is now the United States, where broad, earthen rises composed largely of oyster, clam, and other marine shells dominate the surrounding landscape. Known today simply as the Shell Mound Archaeological Site, it represents the accumulated work of generations whose relationship with the sea shaped every aspect of their lives. Wind carries the scent of salt water through nearby marshes, while ancient live oaks cast long shadows across ground that has quietly preserved evidence of human activity for thousands of years. At first glance, the mounds seem almost natural, blending into the landscape with gentle slopes covered by vegetation. Only after archaeological excavation does their true character become apparent. Layer upon layer of shells, charcoal, animal bones, broken pottery, stone tools, and occasional human burials reveal a remarkably detailed record of long-term occupation. Every deposit reflects repeated visits by people harvesting shellfish, preparing meals, making tools, conducting ceremonies, and adapting to a changing coastal environment. Many shell mounds throughout the southeastern United States began forming several thousand years ago, with some dating back well before 2000 BC. Rather than appearing all at once, they accumulated gradually as communities returned season after season to favored locations along estuaries rich in marine resources. Over centuries, what began as modest deposits eventually grew into impressive earthworks, rising many feet above the surrounding wetlands. For many years, early researchers viewed shell mounds primarily as prehistoric garbage dumps. The enormous quantities of discarded shells appeared to support this straightforward explanation. Modern archaeology, however, has revealed a far more sophisticated picture. The distribution of artifacts often follows carefully organized patterns rather than random disposal. Certain sections contain concentrations of ceremonial objects, while others preserve evidence of cooking, tool production, or communal gatherings. Some mounds incorporate prepared surfaces, pathways, or intentionally shaped platforms. These discoveries suggest that many shell mounds functioned not merely as places where waste accumulated, but as important centers of community life where practical activities and ceremonial traditions existed side by side. This raises an important question. Were the mounds simply the unintended result of daily living, or were at least some deliberately constructed as monuments carrying symbolic meaning? Increasingly, archaeologists favor the second possibility. Building elevated ground within coastal marshes offered practical advantages, protecting settlements from flooding while creating stable areas for gatherings and seasonal occupation. At the same time, the gradual growth of the mounds may have reflected generations of shared labor that strengthened social identity. Every basket of shells added another layer to a place already rich with memory. The surrounding environment adds another dimension to the puzzle. Ancient coastlines shifted continually as sea levels rose and fell over thousands of years. Rivers changed course, marshes expanded, and shorelines migrated inland. Communities living along these dynamic landscapes adapted repeatedly to environmental change. Yet many continued returning to the same mound locations despite these transformations. Excavations have also uncovered human burials within or adjacent to several shell mounds. These discoveries indicate that some sites held profound spiritual significance, serving not only as places of habitation, but also as landscapes where the living maintained enduring relationships with those who came before them. The presence of carefully placed grave goods suggests deliberate ritual practices rather than accidental interment. Trade networks further expand the picture. Artifacts fashioned from exotic stone, marine shell ornaments transported far inland, and pottery styles shared across wide regions demonstrate that coastal communities participated in extensive systems of exchange. The shell mounds stood within interconnected societies whose influence reached well beyond the shoreline. As with many ancient monuments, more speculative interpretations have emerged over time. Some researchers have explored whether the placement of certain mounds reflects observations of seasonal solar events or alignments with waterways important in indigenous cosmology. Others have proposed that particularly large shell complexes served as ceremonial centers attracting visitors from distant communities during annual gatherings. While archaeological evidence supports the importance of communal activity, many details of these traditions remain uncertain. More unconventional theories occasionally suggest that the remarkable scale of some shell mounds points to organizational systems far more elaborate than traditionally assumed, or preserves symbolic designs whose meanings have long since disappeared. Such ideas remain difficult to verify, yet they underscore how much remains unknown about the societies that shaped these landscapes over countless generations. Today, the shell mounds rise quietly above marsh and forest, their outward simplicity concealing thousands of years of accumulated human experience. Every layer preserves fragments of meals shared, ceremonies performed, decisions made, and lives lived beside changing tides. Archaeology continues to uncover remarkable details from within these ancient deposits, but the deeper meanings behind their construction remain only partly understood. Beneath the weathered shells and surrounding earth, countless voices still wait to be heard, leaving us to wonder how much of their story has yet to emerge. The shell mounds demonstrate that even the most ordinary materials can preserve extraordinary chapters of human history. Yet farther inland, along the broad floodplain of the Ohio River, another landscape reveals a society that shaped the earth itself on an entirely different scale. Here, carefully constructed platforms rise above the surrounding fields, forming the remains of a thriving center whose influence once extended across much of eastern North America. Although its outlines remain clearly visible today, many aspects of its purpose and eventual decline continue to invite careful investigation. Angel Mounds stands near what is now Evansville, Indiana, where a series of massive earthen mounds overlook a bend in the Ohio River. At first glance, the grassy platforms appear almost like natural hills softened by centuries of weather and vegetation. Only from above does their deliberate design become fully apparent. The mounds are arranged around a large central plaza, connected by an organized layout that reflects careful planning rather than gradual, accidental growth. The settlement flourished between approximately AD 1100 and 1450 during the Mississippian period, when complex agricultural societies developed throughout much of the southeastern and midwestern United States. At its height, Angel Mounds may have supported a population of several thousand people, making it one of the largest communities north of present-day Mexico during its time. Wooden houses lined the edges of the central plaza, while towering platform mounds supported important public buildings, ceremonial structures, or the residences of political and religious leaders. Constructing these earthworks required an extraordinary commitment of labor. Archaeologists estimate that millions of basket loads of soil were carried by hand to create the largest mounds. There were no draft animals, wheeled vehicles, or metal tools to assist in the work. Instead, generation after generation gradually reshaped the landscape through coordinated effort, producing monuments that still dominate the horizon nearly 1,000 years later. The scale of the project naturally raises an important question. What kind of society could organize so many people for such sustained construction? Excavations suggest that Angel Mounds functioned as more than a residential settlement. The large open plaza appears to have served as a gathering place for ceremonies, political events, trade, and communal activities. Elevated platform mounds separated important buildings from the surrounding community, perhaps emphasizing religious authority, political leadership, or both. This careful spatial organization reflects a society with clearly defined institutions capable of coordinating labor, agriculture, and long-distance exchange. Artifacts recovered from the site reveal connections extending far beyond the Ohio Valley. Marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes region, finely crafted stone tools, and distinctive ceramics indicate participation in a vast network of trade and cultural interaction. Ideas, artistic styles, and ceremonial traditions circulated alongside valuable materials, linking angel mounds to numerous Mississippian communities spread across hundreds of miles. Yet, despite this prosperity, many aspects of daily life remain surprisingly difficult to reconstruct. Written records do not exist, leaving archaeologists to interpret social organization through architecture, artifacts, and environmental evidence alone. The arrangement of homes suggests neighborhoods organized around extended families, while storage pits indicate careful management of harvested crops such as maize, beans, and squash. Even so, the personal experiences of those who lived here remain largely beyond our reach. The earthen mounds themselves continue to inspire discussion. Their shapes vary considerably, with some appearing as broad platforms, while others rise in more conical forms. Many scholars interpret these differences as evidence of distinct ceremonial and administrative functions. Some mounds likely supported temples or council buildings, while others may have served as stages for rituals visible across the plaza below. Researchers have also examined possible astronomical relationships within the settlement's design. Certain alignments between mounds, gateways, and open spaces correspond broadly with the positions of the rising or setting sun during significant points of the year. Seasonal observations would have been important for agricultural societies dependent upon accurate planting and harvesting cycles. Whether these alignments were intentional ceremonial features or practical calendrical aids remains an active subject of investigation. The greatest mystery, however, concerns the community's gradual decline. By the middle of the 15th century, angel mounds had largely been abandoned. Archaeological evidence does not point toward a single catastrophic event. Instead, several factors appear to have converged over generations. Environmental pressures may have reduced agricultural productivity as surrounding forests were cleared for farming and construction. Population growth could have strained local resources. Political alliances may have shifted, redirecting trade routes and weakening regional influence. Disease, social change, or internal conflict have also been proposed, though direct evidence remains limited. Rather than disappearing suddenly, the people of Angel Mounds likely dispersed gradually into neighboring communities, carrying their traditions, knowledge, and cultural identity with them. The settlement itself fell quiet, but its legacy almost certainly continued through descendant indigenous societies whose histories extend into the present. As with many impressive archaeological sites, more speculative interpretations occasionally emerge. Some researchers outside the archaeological mainstream have suggested that the immense earthworks encode sophisticated astronomical knowledge or preserve symbolic landscapes reflecting cosmological beliefs no longer fully understood. Others have proposed that the settlement formed part of a continent-wide ceremonial network connected through geometry and sacred geography. While these ideas remain difficult to verify, they reflect the remarkable precision and ambition visible throughout the site. Today, the grassy mounds rise peacefully above the Ohio River Valley, their carefully shaped forms still defining a landscape created by countless human hands. Visitors can walk the same central plaza where ceremonies once unfolded, and communities gathered beneath open skies. Yet, despite decades of excavation and research, Angel Mounds continues to hold many of its deepest stories in silence, inviting us to consider how much of an ancient society can be recovered from the earth and how much may forever remain beyond its surface. The carefully shaped earthworks of angel mounds remind us that monumental architecture was not limited to stone cities or towering temples. Far to the southwest, another settlement tells a quieter story, one built with remarkable precision in the heart of a vast desert basin. Here, among the weathered sandstone mesas of Chaco Canyon, stands Kletso, a structure that appears modest beside its famous neighbors, yet continues to raise questions about the people who built it and the role it played within one of North America's most sophisticated cultural landscapes. At sunrise, the canyon walls glow with deep shades of red and gold, while long shadows stretch across the dry valley floor. Against this dramatic backdrop, Kletso emerges as a carefully planned complex of sandstone masonry, its walls blending naturally with the surrounding cliffs. Unlike the enormous great houses that dominate other parts of Chaco Canyon, Kletso possesses a more compact appearance. Even so, its construction displays the same extraordinary craftsmanship that has fascinated archaeologists for generations. Built around AD 1125, Kletso belongs to the final major period of construction within Chaco Canyon. By this time, the canyon had already become the center of an extensive regional network connecting communities across much of the American Southwest. Roads stretched outward for many miles, linking distant settlements through trade, communication, and shared ceremonial traditions. Kletso appeared during an era when Chacoan society had already reached an impressive level of architectural and organizational achievement. The building itself contains approximately 55 rooms arranged in a distinctive D-shaped plan, a layout familiar throughout Chaco Canyon, but executed here on a smaller scale. Carefully cut sandstone blocks were stacked with remarkable precision, separated by thin layers of mortar that have endured for nearly 9 centuries. Thick walls helped regulate indoor temperatures, while wooden beams harvested from distant mountain forests supported multiple stories that once overlooked the canyon floor. Transporting those timbers alone required an extraordinary level of coordination. Thousands of large logs were carried from forests located dozens of miles away, crossing rugged terrain without wheeled vehicles or draft animals. Every beam represented countless hours of labor. Every stone reflected careful planning. Kletso may appear modest beside larger great houses, but its construction demanded no less determination from those who built it. One feature immediately distinguishes the settlement from many neighboring structures. Archaeologists have observed that portions of Kletso display architectural characteristics more commonly associated with communities farther north in the Mesa Verde region than with traditional Chacoan construction. The masonry style, room arrangement, and certain design choices differ subtly from nearby great houses. This observation has led to an intriguing possibility. Perhaps some of the builders themselves came from distant communities, bringing their own architectural traditions into the canyon. If so, Kletso may represent more than a simple residential complex. Could it have served as a gathering place for migrants, visiting craftsmen, or allied communities participating in the broader Chacan network? While definitive evidence remains elusive, the idea fits within growing archaeological recognition that Chaco Canyon functioned as a remarkably interconnected cultural center rather than an isolated settlement. People, materials, religious ideas, and construction techniques moved across enormous distances, creating a society far more dynamic than once imagined. Excavations have uncovered pottery, stone tools, turquoise ornaments, and ceremonial objects that reveal participation in this extensive exchange system. Turquoise from distant mines, exotic shells carried inland from the Pacific coast, and finely crafted ceramics demonstrate that Kletso stood within a network extending hundreds of miles. Such connections required not only trade, but also stable social relationships maintained across generations. Yet, one important question remains unresolved. Was Kletso primarily a residential community where families lived year-round, or did it serve more specialized ceremonial purposes? Compared with larger great houses such as Pueblo Bonito, evidence for permanent domestic occupation appears relatively limited. Storage rooms greatly outnumber obvious living spaces, and the overall layout suggests organized activities extending beyond ordinary household life. Some researchers believe the building hosted periodic gatherings connected with regional ceremonies, political meetings, or seasonal events. Others argue that families occupied the settlement continuously while also participating in broader religious traditions centered within Chaco Canyon. The surrounding landscape deepens the sense of purpose behind the architecture. Chaco Canyon itself appears carefully organized, with great houses, roads, shrines, and ceremonial structures distributed in ways that continue to provoke debate. Straight roads extend across mesas, with little regard for practical topography, sometimes climbing steep cliffs where easier routes were available nearby. Their exact function remains uncertain. Were they trade routes, ceremonial pathways, symbolic processional roads, or perhaps all three? Kletso occupies a position within this carefully ordered landscape, yet its precise role has never been fully established. Astronomical interpretation also enters the discussion. Throughout Chaco Canyon, researchers have identified alignments involving solar and lunar events incorporated into architecture and surrounding rock formations. Some scholars suggest that Kletso may have participated in these broader observational systems, although direct evidence is less conclusive than at certain nearby locations. Even subtle orientations may have carried symbolic importance for communities whose agricultural calendar depended upon careful observation of the sky. More speculative theories occasionally move beyond conventional archaeology. Some writers have proposed that Kletso formed part of a sophisticated geometric design extending throughout Chaco Canyon, encoding cosmological knowledge or sacred patterns visible only when viewed across the entire landscape. Others suggest that the settlement participated in ceremonial traditions whose symbolic meaning has largely disappeared with time. These interpretations remain difficult to verify, supported more by pattern recognition than by direct archaeological evidence, yet they reflect the remarkable precision evident throughout the canyon. Today, Kletso stands quietly beneath the same desert sky that guided its builders centuries ago. Its weathered walls continue to preserve evidence of remarkable engineering, long-distance cooperation, and cultural exchange, while leaving many of its deepest purposes open to interpretation. Every carefully placed stone speaks of deliberate intention, yet the complete story remains just beyond reach, inviting us to wonder whether the canyon still holds pieces of a larger design waiting to be understood. The carefully arranged walls of Kletso demonstrate how architecture can preserve ideas long after the people who built it have disappeared. Yet, some ancient builders chose an entirely different medium. Rather than raising structures toward the sky, they shaped the landscape itself, arranging thousands of stones into forms visible only when viewed from above or from carefully chosen vantage points. Among the most intriguing of these creations is the rock eagle Effigy Mound, a monument whose purpose remains one of the enduring puzzles of North American archaeology. Set upon a broad granite ridge in what is now central Georgia, the monument appears almost ordinary when approached at ground level. Loose quartzite rocks cover the hillside, blending naturally with the surrounding terrain. It is only after gaining elevation that its true form becomes apparent. Spread across more than 2 acres, thousands of carefully placed stones outline the unmistakable shape of a great bird with outstretched wings. Measuring roughly 120 feet from wingtip to wingtip, the immense figure seems to emerge directly from the earth itself, its proportions carefully balanced despite the uneven landscape beneath it. Unlike many monumental structures built from carved blocks or packed earth, Rock Eagle consists almost entirely of naturally weathered stones gathered from the surrounding area. No mortar binds them together. Instead, each rock was deliberately positioned to contribute to the larger design. Constructing such a figure would have required not only considerable labor, but also a clear understanding of how the completed image would appear from perspectives unavailable to those working directly upon it. Archaeologists generally attribute the mound to indigenous peoples associated with the woodland period, possibly between approximately 1000 BC and AD 1000, although its precise age remains uncertain. The absence of abundant artifacts directly connected with the construction has made precise dating difficult. Unlike settlements where pottery, tools, and domestic refuse accumulate over centuries, Rock Eagle offers comparatively few clues regarding the community that created it. This scarcity of evidence has encouraged decades of careful investigation. Why devote so much effort to constructing a monumental bird shape that cannot easily be appreciated from the ground? One explanation centers on ceremony. Throughout many indigenous cultures of eastern North America, birds occupied important symbolic roles, often representing connections between the earth and the sky or serving as powerful spiritual messengers. An eagle, in particular, has long carried profound cultural significance, associated with strength, vision, and the world above. Although archaeologists must avoid projecting later traditions directly into the distant past, the possibility that the effigy served ceremonial or spiritual purposes remains widely considered. Yet another detail complicates the picture. Some researchers have questioned whether the figure truly represents an eagle at all. Viewed from different angles, the proportions can resemble other large birds, including hawks or even vultures. Natural weathering, vegetation growth, and centuries of subtle disturbance have altered portions of the original outline, making precise identification increasingly difficult. If the intended animal cannot be established with certainty, interpreting its symbolic meaning becomes even more challenging. The location itself also invites attention. Rock Eagle occupies elevated ground commanding broad views of the surrounding countryside. Such prominent settings frequently held ceremonial importance in many prehistoric societies, serving as gathering places where communities marked seasonal events, conducted rituals, or reinforced social relationships. Was the monument intended primarily for those standing within it, participating in ceremonies whose meanings are now lost? Or was its true audience believed to exist somewhere beyond ordinary human sight? Unlike defensive fortifications or permanent villages, the effigy contains no obvious evidence of long-term habitation. Excavations have revealed relatively little indicating continuous occupation directly atop the mound. This suggests that the site may have functioned as a destination visited periodically rather than as a residential settlement. Seasonal ceremonies, regional gatherings, or important communal events could explain why such an ambitious construction was maintained, despite the absence of extensive domestic remains. Researchers have also examined possible astronomical relationships associated with the monument. Certain alignments between the bird's body, surrounding landscape, and the positions of sunrise or sunset during particular times of year have been proposed. These observations remain tentative, however. Establishing intentional astronomical design requires careful evidence, and natural landscapes often produce apparent alignments by coincidence. Even so, many prehistoric societies carefully observed celestial cycles, making such possibilities worthy of continued investigation. The construction methods themselves remain impressive. Thousands of stones had to be collected, transported, and arranged with consistent proportions over a large area. Without the benefit of aerial perspectives, maintaining the bird's overall symmetry would have required thoughtful planning and coordination. How did the builders visualize the completed figure while working from ground level? Did they rely upon elevated observation points, measuring chords, oral instructions, or construction techniques that have since disappeared? Archaeology can identify the finished result, but the practical process behind its creation remains largely speculative. As with many ancient monuments whose original purpose has faded from memory, Rock Eagle has inspired interpretations extending beyond mainstream scholarship. Some writers suggest that the effigy formed part of a broader ceremonial landscape connecting distant mound complexes through symbolic geometry. Others argue that its proportions encode astronomical observations or preserve knowledge expressed through landscape design rather than written language. These ideas remain difficult to verify, resting largely upon interpretation rather than direct archaeological evidence. Nevertheless, they illustrate how the monument continues to inspire both scientific inquiry and public imagination. Today, the stone bird still rests quietly upon its hillside, enduring through centuries of changing seasons with remarkable resilience. Visitors standing among the rocks often see only scattered stones until they step back and recognize the immense form taking shape across the ground. It is a reminder that some of history's greatest achievements reveal themselves only through patience and perspective. Whether Rock Eagle served as a sacred symbol, a ceremonial gathering place, or fulfilled a purpose no longer preserved in memory, it continues to watch silently over the landscape, inviting us to consider how many meanings remain concealed within the patterns our ancestors left behind. The immense stone bird of Rock Eagle reminds us that landscapes can preserve meaning long after the voices that shaped them have faded. Yet, farther west, another place tells its story through towering cliffs rather than carefully arranged stones. Here, entire communities once lived within canyon walls so immense that they seem to belong as much to the landscape as the rock itself. Even today, the silence lingering among these ancient dwellings invites questions that remain difficult to answer. Canyon de Chelly stretches through the high desert of what is now northeastern Arizona, where sheer sandstone walls rise hundreds of feet above fertile valley floors. Cottonwood trees line the streams below, their leaves whispering in the desert breeze, while sunlight slowly shifts across cliffs stained with deep shades of red, orange, and gold. From the rim, the canyon appears endless, winding through the landscape in a series of dramatic bends and towering alcoves. Hidden within these natural shelters are the remains of homes built centuries ago, their stone walls blending almost perfectly with the surrounding sandstone. Unlike many archaeological sites that stand abandoned in remote wilderness, Canyon de Chelly remains a living cultural landscape. For countless generations, the canyon has been home to the Navajo people, whose families continue to farm, herd livestock, and maintain traditions within its boundaries. Long before the arrival of the Navajo, however, the canyon sheltered earlier communities, including the ancestral Pueblo people, who established villages here between approximately AD 350 and 1300. The ruins they left behind remain among the most remarkable in North America. Stone dwellings cling to narrow ledges high above the canyon floor, tucked beneath enormous rock overhangs that provided protection from rain, wind, and intense summer heat. Multi-story structures containing living quarters, storage rooms, and ceremonial spaces were carefully constructed using sandstone blocks and mortar. From a distance, the buildings appear almost suspended against the cliff face, their builders taking full advantage of natural formations that offered both security and shelter. One of the most famous of these settlements is the White House Ruin, named after patches of white plaster still visible on portions of its walls. Built in stages over several centuries, the complex demonstrates extraordinary masonry skills and careful planning. Nearby lie dozens of lesser-known sites, many accessible only by difficult climbs or hidden within isolated side canyons. Together, they reveal a thriving network of communities that once flourished throughout this dramatic landscape. The choice to build within the cliffs has long attracted attention. Protection certainly played a role. Elevated dwellings allowed residents to monitor movement through the canyon while reducing vulnerability to attack. The natural alcoves also created stable living conditions, moderating temperatures throughout the year. Yet, practical considerations alone may not fully explain the remarkable placement of these settlements. Why were certain alcoves selected while others, seemingly similar, remained untouched? Archaeologists suggest that access to water, fertile farmland, and nearby resources influenced settlement patterns. Springs emerging from canyon walls and seasonal streams flowing along the valley floor provided reliable water in an otherwise dry region. Rich alluvial soils supported crops of corn, beans, and squash, while surrounding plateaus offered hunting opportunities and access to timber. Even so, some particularly dramatic locations appear to have been chosen despite their relative difficulty of access, hinting that symbolic or ceremonial considerations may also have influenced these decisions. The canyon itself possesses an atmosphere that naturally encourages reflection. Towering cliffs create shifting patterns of light and shadow throughout the day, while echoes carry voices across surprising distances. Certain rock formations resemble towers, faces, or enormous natural sculptures shaped over millions of years by erosion. For generations, these features have become part of oral traditions explaining the landscape's significance and its relationship to those who have lived here. Among the most striking landmarks is Spider Rock, a sandstone spire rising roughly 800 feet from the canyon floor. According to Navajo tradition, the formation is associated with Spider Woman, a respected figure in traditional beliefs who taught weaving and wisdom to the people. These enduring stories remind us that archaeological remains exist within landscapes whose meanings continue to live through indigenous knowledge, extending beyond what excavation alone can reveal. The greatest archaeological mystery concerns the departure of the ancestral Pueblo inhabitants during the late 13th century. Like many communities throughout the Southwest, the cliff dwellings of Canyon de Chelly were gradually abandoned rather than suddenly destroyed. Tree ring studies point toward prolonged drought affecting agriculture across the region. Environmental stress, shifting political relationships, and changing trade networks may all have contributed to the movement of populations toward other Pueblo communities farther south and east. Yet, no single explanation accounts for every settlement. Some villages were left behind while nearby locations continued to be occupied for longer periods. Families appear to have departed in an orderly manner, taking many valuable possessions with them rather than fleeing sudden catastrophe. Their careful withdrawal suggests planned migration instead of collapse, but the precise reasons behind these decisions remain only partly understood. Researchers have also explored whether the canyon's geography carried ceremonial significance beyond its practical advantages. Certain cliff dwellings receive sunlight in distinctive ways during different seasons, while prominent landmarks may have served as visual reference points for ceremonies or observations tied to the annual cycle. Although evidence for deliberate astronomical alignments remains limited, the close relationship between architecture and the surrounding landscape suggests that natural features held importance extending beyond simple convenience. As with many iconic archaeological sites, more speculative interpretations occasionally emerge. Some writers propose that the cliff dwellings formed part of a broader sacred landscape, connected through symbolic pathways, or encoded cosmological beliefs expressed in architecture and geography. Others argue that hidden chambers or undiscovered passages remain concealed within the canyon walls. While such ideas capture public imagination, archaeological investigations have produced little evidence supporting these more ambitious claims. Today, Canyon de Chelly continues to preserve both ancient ruins and living traditions within the same remarkable landscape. Wind still moves through the sandstone corridors, and sunlight continues to illuminate empty doorways where families once watched the changing seasons unfold below. The stone walls remain standing, but the lives, conversations, and decisions that shaped them have largely faded from memory. Perhaps the canyon's greatest mystery is not why its builders eventually left, but how much of their understanding of this extraordinary place still survives in stories that the cliffs continue to guard in silence. The towering walls of Canyon de Chelly remind us that entire communities once found security within stone cliffs shaped by nature. Yet farther south, another monument rises not from the shelter of a canyon, but from the open desert itself. Standing alone against the Arizona sky, its massive earthen walls have endured centuries of wind, rain, and relentless heat. It is a place whose purpose still invites debate, a structure that seems both practical and ceremonial, familiar yet deeply enigmatic. Across the broad Sonoran Desert of what is now south-central Arizona, the landscape stretches outward beneath an endless sky. Mesquite trees, towering saguaros, and dry washes define a region where survival has always depended upon understanding water. For much of the year, rainfall is scarce, and temperatures often climb to extremes. Yet, long before European explorers entered this desert, a thriving agricultural society transformed this demanding environment into one of the most productive landscapes in prehistoric North America. At the heart of that achievement stands Casa Grande. Its Spanish name, meaning Great House, was given centuries after its builders had already departed. Rising nearly 4 stories high, the structure dominates the surrounding plain with an imposing simplicity. Constructed from caliche, a naturally occurring mixture of clay, sand, and calcium carbonate, the building possesses walls several feet thick, capable of resisting both intense summer heat and surprisingly cold desert nights. Even after more than 6 centuries, much of the structure remains standing, protected today beneath a modern shelter designed to preserve one of the largest prehistoric earthen buildings ever constructed in North America. Archaeologists generally associate Casa Grande with the ancestral Hohokam culture, whose communities flourished across central and southern Arizona for more than 1,000 years. Beginning well before AD 300, the Hohokam developed an extensive irrigation system that diverted water from the Gila and Salt rivers through hundreds of miles of carefully engineered canals. Some measured more than 50 feet wide and several miles long, representing one of the most ambitious hydraulic systems anywhere in the ancient Americas. This achievement alone raises important questions. How did communities without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or draft animals coordinate such enormous public works over generations? The canals required careful planning. Water gradients had to remain precise enough to maintain steady flow without causing erosion. Excavation demanded countless hours of organized labor, while regular maintenance ensured that sediment and vegetation did not obstruct the channels. Such projects imply sophisticated leadership, technical knowledge, and cooperation extending far beyond individual villages. Casa Grande appears to have occupied a central position within this remarkable society. The building itself measures roughly 60 feet in length and contains multiple stories connected by interior rooms whose exact functions remain uncertain. Wooden beams, harvested from distant mountain forests, supported upper floors that no longer survive. Small openings pierce the thick walls, allowing light and ventilation while creating an interior unlike ordinary domestic dwellings. At first glance, it might seem reasonable to interpret Casa Grande simply as the residence of an important leader. Yet, the evidence complicates that assumption. Unlike a palace filled with luxury goods or defensive fortifications, the building contains relatively few indications of exclusive royal occupation. Instead, archaeologists have proposed several possibilities. Some believe it served as an administrative center overseeing irrigation and agricultural production. Others suggest it functioned primarily as a ceremonial building where important religious activities took place. Still others argue that it combined political, economic, and ceremonial roles within a single structure. Each interpretation explains part of the evidence, yet none resolves every question. The orientation of the building has attracted particular attention for more than a century. Certain windows and wall openings appear to align closely with the positions of the sun during the summer and winter solstices, as well as other significant points in the annual solar cycle. During particular mornings or evenings, sunlight enters selected openings in ways that have led researchers to suggest that Casa Grande may have functioned, at least in part, as an astronomical observatory. For an agricultural society, careful observation of seasonal change held obvious practical value. Knowing when to plant crops, maintain irrigation canals, or prepare for changing weather patterns could determine the success or failure of an entire harvest. Throughout the ancient world, many cultures integrated astronomy into architecture, using buildings themselves as tools for marking the passage of time. Did the builders of Casa Grande intentionally incorporate these alignments? Many archaeologists believe they did. Others remain more cautious, noting that some apparent alignments may occur naturally within rectangular buildings containing numerous openings. Demonstrating intentional design requires careful analysis, and debate continues regarding exactly which observations were significant and which may simply reflect coincidence. Regardless of the outcome, the possibility reveals a society paying close attention to the rhythms of the sky. The surrounding settlement further emphasizes Casa Grande's importance. Excavations have uncovered plazas, residential compounds, ball courts, workshops, storage facilities, and evidence of extensive craft production. Shell jewelry imported from the Pacific coast, copper bells from western Mexico, finely made ceramics, and beautifully carved stone tools reveal participation in long-distance trade networks stretching across much of the southwest and northern Mexico. Far from existing in isolation, Casa Grande formed part of an interconnected world where goods, ideas, technologies, and ceremonial traditions moved across deserts and mountain ranges through sustained human relationships. Yet, perhaps the greatest mystery concerns not its construction, but its abandonment. By approximately AD 1450, Casa Grande and many surrounding Hohokam settlements had gradually been deserted. There is little evidence of sudden destruction. The walls did not collapse through warfare, nor do archaeological layers indicate widespread burning or violent conflict. Instead, the transition appears to have unfolded over decades. Why would the builders abandon one of the most sophisticated irrigation societies in prehistoric North America? Environmental change offers one important explanation. Repeated flooding along the Gila River may have damaged canal systems that required constant maintenance. Extended droughts could have reduced agricultural productivity while increasing competition for water. Tree ring studies and sediment analysis indicate that the region experienced periods of climatic instability capable of placing enormous pressure upon farming communities. Social factors may also have contributed. As populations grew, maintaining increasingly complex irrigation networks required greater coordination among neighboring settlements. Political disagreements, shifting alliances, or gradual decentralization may have weakened the institutions responsible for managing water distribution. Without effective cooperation, even highly productive agricultural systems become difficult to sustain. Trade patterns likewise appear to have changed during this period. Connections with distant regions declined, suggesting broader transformations affecting societies throughout the Southwest. Rather than disappearing completely, many descendants of the Hohokam likely joined neighboring communities, carrying forward traditions that continued to evolve through later indigenous cultures. Yet, archaeology cannot fully reconstruct the personal decisions behind those migrations. Did families recognize that their society was gradually changing? Were younger generations eager to seek opportunities elsewhere while older residents remained committed to familiar lands? Did environmental pressures unfold slowly enough that no single generation recognized the scale of the transformation? These are questions that artifacts alone cannot answer. Naturally, a monument as unusual as Casa Grande has attracted more speculative interpretations as well. As the towering walls of Casa Grande gradually disappear into the desert horizon, another settlement invites us to consider a different chapter of the ancestral Pueblo story. Here, the architecture is smaller, the landscape more secluded, and the clues far more subtle. Rather than dominating an open plain, Painted Hand Pueblo rests quietly among rugged mesas and winding canyons, where time has preserved fragments of a community whose identity remains only partially understood. The first impression is one of remarkable stillness. Layers of sandstone rise in warm shades of red and ochre beneath an immense sky, while scattered juniper and pinyon trees cling to rocky slopes shaped by centuries of wind and seasonal rain. Tucked against the cliff face stands the pueblo itself, its weathered masonry blending so naturally with the surrounding stone that it seems less like a human settlement than a continuation of the landscape. Empty doorways face the valley below, while collapsed walls reveal only hints of the lives once carried out within these carefully built rooms. Painted Hand Pueblo is generally associated with the ancestral Pueblo people, who occupied much of the Four Corners region during the late prehistoric period. Archaeological evidence suggests that the settlement flourished sometime between the 12th and early 13th centuries, during an era when many Pueblo communities were expanding into increasingly sophisticated villages linked by trade, shared traditions, and ceremonial practices. Although far less famous than larger sites such as Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon, Painted Hand Pueblo offers a valuable glimpse into the everyday realities of smaller settlements that formed the foundation of this broader cultural world. The site owes its modern name to one of its most distinctive features, a faded red handprint preserved on the rock wall near part of the settlement. Unlike elaborate murals or complex petroglyphs, the image is striking in its simplicity. A human hand, pressed against stone centuries ago, remains visible despite generations of exposure to wind, sunlight, and changing seasons. Whether created by an adult or a child, during a ceremony or an ordinary moment, no one can say with certainty. Yet, that single mark creates an unusually direct connection between the present and an individual who lived here long ago. Why was the hand placed there? Across many cultures, handprints have served different purposes. They may represent identity, participation in ceremonies, protection, remembrance, or expressions of spiritual belief. Similar images appear in caves and rock shelters around the world, often separated by thousands of miles and many centuries. At Painted Hand Pueblo, however, the meaning of this particular image has never been conclusively established. Without written records or surviving explanations directly connected to the site, archaeologists can only compare it with broader traditions while acknowledging the limits of interpretation. The settlement itself reflects careful adaptation to a demanding environment. Stone rooms were constructed beneath protective overhangs, where natural cliffs shielded residents from harsh weather while helping regulate indoor temperatures. Nearby terraces likely supported crops of corn, beans, and squash, while surrounding woodland supplied fuel, building materials, and game. Springs and seasonal water sources made long-term occupation possible despite the region's dry climate. Excavations have uncovered pottery fragments, stone tools, food storage areas, and evidence of daily domestic activity. Together, these discoveries portray a community engaged in farming, hunting, craft production, and regional exchange. Decorative pottery styles found at the site closely resemble those from neighboring Pueblo settlements, demonstrating that Painted Hand Pueblo participated in wider cultural networks extending throughout the Southwest. Even relatively isolated communities remained connected through trade, marriage, ceremony, and shared knowledge passed between generations. Yet, the Pueblo also raises familiar questions echoed throughout the region. Like many settlements established during the 13th century, Painted Hand Pueblo appears to have been occupied for a relatively limited period before being abandoned. There is little evidence of catastrophic destruction. Instead, families seem to have departed gradually, taking many useful possessions with them while leaving behind the buildings that had once anchored community life. Environmental change provides one possible explanation. Tree ring studies from across the Southwest indicate prolonged drought during the late 1200s, reducing agricultural productivity and increasing pressure on available resources. Smaller settlements may have become increasingly difficult to sustain as water supplies fluctuated and harvests became less predictable. Larger regional communities could have offered greater security through shared labor and more reliable access to resources. Other possibilities remain equally important. Population movements, changing political relationships, evolving ceremonial traditions, or shifting trade routes may all have influenced the decision to relocate. Archaeology can identify broad regional patterns, but the individual choices made by families, the conversations, concerns, and hopes that shaped their future, remain largely invisible. The red handprint itself continues to invite thoughtful speculation. Some researchers suggest it marked the completion of construction, symbolized membership within a particular family or clan, or formed part of a ritual associated with the occupation of the settlement. Others argue that it may simply represent an intensely personal gesture, preserving the presence of one individual without broader symbolic intent. None of these interpretations can be confirmed, yet each reminds us how easily meaning can fade when language, tradition, and memory are separated by centuries. More speculative theories occasionally move beyond the available evidence. Some writers propose that the handprint functioned as a ceremonial marker, identifying sacred pathways between Pueblo communities, or that it formed part of a larger symbolic landscape whose full design has not survived. Others suggest that additional paintings, now lost to erosion, once transformed the cliff into a much richer visual record than what remains today. While these ideas cannot presently be demonstrated archaeologically, they highlight how incomplete the surviving evidence may actually be. Today, Painted Hand Pueblo rests quietly beneath the same cliffs that sheltered its builders centuries ago. The walls continue to weather slowly, while the faded handprint endures as one of the most personal traces left by an ancient community. It is neither a grand monument nor an imposing fortress, yet perhaps that is precisely what makes it so compelling. One silent hand still reaches across the centuries, leaving us to wonder whose mark it was, what it once meant, and how many other stories have disappeared with the people who quietly walked away from this remarkable place. The solitary handprint at Painted Hand Pueblo reminds us that even the smallest trace can preserve the presence of an entire community. Yet, farther north, another settlement reveals a much grander chapter of the ancestral Pueblo world. Here, massive masonry walls, ceremonial chambers, and carefully planned courtyards speak of a society whose influence reached far beyond a single valley. Even today, despite decades of archaeological research, the true purpose of this remarkable place remains only partly understood. Along the fertile banks of the Animas River in what is now northwestern New Mexico stand the remains of a settlement long known as Aztec Ruins. The name, given by early American settlers during the 19th century, reflects a historical misunderstanding. The site was not built by the Aztec civilization of central Mexico, but by the ancestral Pueblo people several centuries earlier. Although the name has endured, Archaeologists recognize the settlement as one of the northernmost major centers connected to the broader Chacuan cultural tradition. At first glance, the ruins appear almost orderly in their silence. Rows of sandstone walls outline hundreds of interconnected rooms surrounding broad plazas, while portions of multi-story buildings still rise above the ground, hinting at the settlement's former scale. Carefully fitted masonry displays a remarkable level of craftsmanship, with precisely shaped stones stacked in uniform courses that have survived more than 700 years of changing weather. Walking through the narrow passageways today, it is easy to sense that this was once a place of considerable importance rather than an ordinary village. Construction began around AD 1110, during a period when the great centers of Chaco Canyon were beginning to decline. Many researchers believe that Aztec ruins emerged as a new regional center, carrying forward architectural traditions, ceremonial practices, and social organization inherited from the Chacuan world. The similarities are striking. Great houses, formal plazas, and carefully engineered ceremonial structures all reflect knowledge passed between communities separated by many miles. Among the site's most impressive features is its Great Kiva. Measuring more than 40 feet in diameter, this circular ceremonial chamber was built partially underground and reconstructed using archaeological evidence to illustrate its original appearance. Massive wooden roof beams once spanned the interior, while carefully placed ventilation shafts, deflectors, benches, and fire pits reveal sophisticated engineering. Similar structures throughout the Pueblo world served important religious and communal functions, though many details of the ceremonies conducted within them remain known primarily through the traditions of descendant Pueblo peoples rather than archaeology alone. The presence of such monumental architecture raises an important question. Was Aztec Ruins primarily a thriving residential city, or was it designed as a ceremonial destination where people gathered only during particular seasons? Excavations suggest evidence for both possibilities. Hundreds of rooms likely housed families engaged in farming, pottery production, weaving, and food storage. At the same time, the unusually large ceremonial spaces and monumental public architecture imply activities extending well beyond ordinary domestic life. Seasonal gatherings, political councils, trade exchanges, and religious ceremonies may all have drawn visitors from surrounding communities. The settlement's location also appears carefully chosen. The Animas River provided dependable water for agriculture, while nearby valleys supported fertile fields capable of sustaining substantial populations. Roads and natural travel corridors linked the community with neighboring settlements throughout the San Juan Basin, facilitating movement of goods, ideas, and ceremonial traditions. Pottery, turquoise, shells, stone tools, and exotic materials recovered during excavations demonstrate participation in extensive exchange networks stretching across the Southwest. Yet, perhaps the greatest mystery concerns the community's relationship with Chaco Canyon. The architectural similarities are too numerous to dismiss as coincidence. Masonry techniques, room arrangements, ceremonial design, and construction methods all point toward strong cultural connections. Did skilled builders migrate north as Chaco's influence declined? Were political or religious leaders intentionally establishing a successor center? Or did independent communities simply continue traditions they had inherited over generations? Archaeology offers compelling clues but no definitive answer. Tree ring dating indicates that many construction timbers were harvested over relatively short periods, suggesting coordinated building projects involving organized labor. Such planning reflects a society capable of mobilizing significant resources. Yet exactly who directed these efforts and how authority was exercised remains uncertain. Like many major Pueblo settlements, Aztec Ruins was gradually abandoned during the late 13th century. there is little indication of widespread warfare or sudden catastrophe. Instead, evidence points toward gradual migration, consistent with broader population movements occurring throughout the Southwest during this period. Extended drought, changing agricultural conditions, shifting trade routes, and evolving social relationships have all been proposed as contributing factors. Rather than disappearing, the descendants of these communities almost certainly carried their traditions into other Pueblo settlements, where aspects of their culture continue today. The settlement also invites discussion about astronomy. Several researchers have noted possible alignments between buildings, plazas, and significant solar or lunar events. Seasonal observations would have been valuable for agricultural planning as well as ceremonial life. While some proposed alignments remain debated, they fit within a broader pattern of astronomical awareness documented at other Pueblo sites. Whether every orientation reflects deliberate design or practical construction continues to be carefully examined. As often happens with remarkable archaeological sites, more speculative interpretations occasionally emerge. Some writers suggest that Aztec ruins formed part of a continent-wide sacred landscape, linked through geometric relationships extending between major ceremonial centers. Others argue that hidden symbolism embedded within the architecture reflects cosmological knowledge not yet fully recognized by modern scholarship. Although these ideas remain unsupported by direct archaeological evidence, they illustrate how powerfully the site continues to inspire curiosity. Today, the sandstone walls stand quietly beneath the New Mexico sky, preserving the outlines of a community that once echoed with conversation, ceremony, and daily life. Every room, plaza, and carefully constructed kiva speaks of remarkable skill and enduring tradition, yet the complete story remains unfinished. The builders left no written explanation for their ambitions, their beliefs, or the choices that eventually led them elsewhere. Instead, they entrusted those answers to stone, and the ruins continued to wait patiently for those willing to listen. The enduring walls of Aztec ruins remind us that even the largest settlements can preserve only fragments of the lives once lived within them. Yet, farther west, overlooking the lush, Verde Valley of central Arizona, another hilltop community offers a quieter but equally compelling mystery. From a distance, its weathered stone walls seem almost to grow naturally from the ridge itself, blending so completely with the surrounding landscape that the boundary between nature and human craftsmanship begins to disappear. Perched atop a narrow limestone ridge, Tuzigoot commands sweeping views of the Verde River and the fertile floodplain below. Today, the valley is dotted with cottonwood trees, vineyards, and desert vegetation, but centuries ago it supported a thriving agricultural landscape nourished by dependable water sources and rich alluvial soil. Rising above it all, the pueblo stretches along the crest of the ridge like the spine of a great stone creature, its carefully arranged rooms following the contours of the hill rather than forcing the land to conform to human design. The name Tuzigoot comes from the Apache language and is commonly translated as crooked water, referring to the winding course of the nearby Verde River. The settlement itself, however, predates Apache occupation by several centuries. Archaeologists associate Tuzigoot with the Sinagua culture, whose communities flourished throughout central Arizona between approximately AD 1000 and 1400. The pueblo reached its greatest development between AD 1125 and 1400, eventually expanding into a complex containing more than 100 rooms arranged across multiple levels. Unlike the monumental great houses of Chaco Canyon or the dramatic cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, Tuzigoot reflects a different architectural philosophy. Rather than concentrating construction around vast ceremonial plazas, the builders created an interconnected network of living spaces, storage rooms, elevated terraces, and communal areas that adapted naturally to the ridge's elongated shape. Thick limestone walls, bonded with mud mortar, provided insulation against both intense summer heat and cool desert nights. The settlement appears carefully positioned. From the highest points, residents could observe movement throughout much of the Verde Valley, including nearby agricultural fields, trade routes, and neighboring communities. Such visibility undoubtedly offered practical advantages, allowing early warning of approaching visitors while strengthening communication with surrounding settlements. Yet, the elevated location also carried symbolic weight. Across many indigenous societies of the Southwest, prominent hills and ridges frequently held ceremonial significance, connecting the human world with the surrounding landscape in meaningful ways. Excavations have revealed evidence of a prosperous community engaged in farming, hunting, weaving, pottery production, and long-distance exchange. Corn, beans, squash, and cotton formed the agricultural foundation of daily life, supported by irrigation and careful management of seasonal water supplies. Stone tools, bone implements, finely decorated ceramics, and shell ornaments demonstrate a level of craftsmanship reflecting generations of accumulated knowledge. Perhaps most revealing are the imported materials uncovered during excavation. Marine shells from the Gulf of California, copper bells originating in western Mexico, turquoise, obsidian, and exotic stone all reached Tuzigoot through extensive regional trade networks. These discoveries challenge earlier assumptions that southwestern settlements developed in relative isolation. Instead, they reveal a landscape connected through commerce, shared traditions, and regular interaction extending across hundreds of miles. Even so, many questions remain unanswered. What role did Tuzigoot play within this broader network? Was it primarily a residential farming village supporting local agriculture? Or did its elevated position also make it an administrative or ceremonial center serving communities throughout the Verde Valley? Researchers continue to debate these possibilities. The architecture suggests long-term domestic occupation, yet certain features, including elevated gathering spaces and unusually organized room arrangements, hint at functions extending beyond everyday household life. Social, political, and religious activities likely overlapped in ways that archaeology can only partly reconstruct. The surrounding region provides additional clues. Tuzigoot did not stand alone. Nearby settlements, including Montezuma Castle, Montezuma Well, and numerous smaller pueblos, formed an interconnected cultural landscape whose communities shared resources, technologies, and traditions. Together, they demonstrate a remarkably sophisticated adaptation to the challenges of the desert Southwest. One enduring mystery concerns the gradual expansion of the settlement itself. Early construction began with a relatively modest cluster of rooms, but over generations the pueblo steadily grew until it covered much of the ridge. New structures were added atop earlier foundations, producing an architectural record that reflects changing priorities over centuries. Was this growth driven by increasing population, political importance, or evolving ceremonial functions? The evidence supports several possibilities, yet none fully explains the settlement's development. Then came the familiar transition seen throughout much of the region. By approximately AD 1400, Tuzigoot was largely abandoned. As with many Pueblo and Sinagua settlements, there is little evidence of sudden destruction or widespread violence. Instead, archaeological evidence points toward gradual migration. Environmental pressures likely played a significant role. Extended drought, fluctuating water supplies, declining agricultural productivity, and increasing competition for resources may all have encouraged families to relocate. Broader social changes, shifting trade networks, and evolving alliances almost certainly contributed as well. Yet, the precise reasons remain elusive. Why did communities that had flourished for centuries decide to leave carefully built homes behind? Were these departures planned over generations, or did circumstances change more rapidly than the archaeological record can reveal? Without written accounts, these deeply human decisions remain largely beyond recovery. The hilltop location has also inspired discussions about astronomy. Some researchers have noted possible relationships between the orientation of certain walls and seasonal solar events, although the evidence remains less conclusive than at sites specifically associated with astronomical observation. Others suggest that the surrounding mountain peaks themselves may have served as natural markers within ceremonial calendars tied to planting and harvest cycles. These possibilities remain under active study, illustrating how architecture and landscape often work together in subtle ways throughout the ancient Southwest. As with many enduring archaeological sites, more speculative theories occasionally appear. Some writers propose that Tuzigoot formed part of an extensive ceremonial network connecting sacred locations throughout the Verde Valley, according to geometric patterns now only partially understood. Others argue that important underground chambers or undiscovered structures may still lie concealed beneath the ridge. While archaeological investigations have not confirmed such claims, they reflect the continued fascination inspired by a settlement whose full story has yet to be recovered. Today, the restored stone walls of Tuzigoot rise quietly above the Verde Valley, overlooking fields that continue to support human communities much as they did centuries ago. Wind moves through empty rooms where families once gathered, traded, celebrated, and planned for future harvests. The builders left behind no written explanation of their beliefs or their final departure. Instead, they entrusted their legacy to stone, landscape, and memory, leaving future generations to ask whether the ridge still holds chapters of its history waiting patiently beneath the desert soil. The quiet ridge of Tuzigoot reminds us that entire communities once watched over fertile valleys from carefully chosen heights. Yet, only a short distance away, another settlement appears even more improbable. Suspended high within a sheer limestone cliff, it seems almost beyond human reach, a place where architecture and landscape merge so completely that the boundary between the natural world and human ingenuity nearly disappears. Montezuma Castle rises from the face of a towering white limestone cliff overlooking Beaver Creek in what is now central Arizona. Despite its name, the structure has no connection to the Aztec emperor Montezuma. Early European-American settlers mistakenly believed the impressive cliff dwelling had been built by the Aztecs, and the name endured long after archaeologists established its true origins. In reality, the settlement was constructed centuries earlier by the Sinagua people, whose descendants are believed to be connected with several modern Pueblo communities. From the canyon floor, the dwelling appears almost suspended in midair. Built approximately 90 feet above the valley below, the 5-story structure occupies a broad, natural alcove carved into the cliff by countless centuries of erosion. The limestone overhang protects the rooms from rain while shielding them from the intense Arizona sun. Even today, the walls remain remarkably well preserved, making Montezuma Castle one of the finest surviving cliff dwellings in North America. Construction is believed to have begun around AD 1100, with the community reaching its greatest development between AD 1200 and 1400. The structure eventually contained roughly 20 rooms capable of housing several dozen people. Stone masonry combined with wooden beams and mud plaster created a durable complex, carefully adapted to the surrounding rock formation. Every wall follows the contours of the alcove, demonstrating an intimate understanding of both engineering and the natural landscape. The location immediately raises one of the site's greatest mysteries. Why build so high above the valley floor? The practical explanations are compelling. Elevation offered protection from seasonal flooding along Beaver Creek while reducing the risk of attack during periods of regional conflict. The alcove also maintained relatively stable temperatures throughout the year, remaining cooler during summer and warmer during winter. Access could be controlled through ladders that were easily removed when necessary, creating a naturally defensible home. Yet, practical concerns alone may not tell the entire story. The Sinagua people were highly skilled at adapting architecture to the landscape. Choosing such an elevated position required considerable effort. Every stone, timber, basket of harvested crops, and container of water had to be carried upward. Daily life demanded repeated journeys between the valley and the cliff dwelling. Such labor suggests that the location offered benefits extending beyond simple convenience. Below the cliff, the Verde Valley provided abundant resources. Beaver Creek flowed reliably through the canyon, supporting fertile agricultural fields where corn, beans, squash, and cotton could be cultivated. Cottonwood forests supplied timber and fuel, while nearby hills offered game and valuable plant resources. The combination of dependable water and productive farmland made the valley one of the most attractive environments in central Arizona. Excavations have uncovered finely crafted pottery, woven textiles, bone tools, stone implements, and ornamental jewelry that reveal a community deeply connected to wider regional trade networks. Marine shells from the Gulf of California, copper objects originating far to the south, and obsidian transported from distant volcanic regions demonstrate that Montezuma Castle was not an isolated refuge, but part of an extensive cultural landscape linking communities throughout the Southwest. Researchers continue to debate the settlement's broader role. Was Montezuma Castle primarily a residential village, or did it also function as a regional center for ceremony, administration, or seasonal gatherings? Its relatively modest size suggests that only a limited population lived within the cliff dwelling itself. At the same time, archaeological evidence indicates the existence of additional structures surrounding the site, many of which no longer survive above ground. The visible cliff dwelling may therefore represent only one portion of a much larger community extending across the valley. The architecture reflects thoughtful planning. Small doorways minimized heat loss, while thick masonry walls insulated interior rooms against changing temperatures. Storage spaces protected harvested food throughout the year, and smoke-blackened ceilings preserve evidence of countless cooking fires that once illuminated the interior. Every feature reflects practical experience accumulated over generations. One aspect that continues to intrigue archaeologists is the relationship between Montezuma Castle and neighboring settlements such as Tuzigoot and Montezuma Well. These communities shared similar construction techniques, agricultural practices, and trade connections while occupying distinctly different landscapes. Together, they formed an interconnected regional society, yet each settlement adapted uniquely to its environment. Why did some communities choose exposed hilltops, while others preferred sheltered cliffs? The answer may involve a combination of environmental conditions, available resources, local traditions, and changing social circumstances. Different communities likely developed distinct identities while remaining connected through shared culture and regular interaction. As with many Sinagua settlements, Montezuma Castle was gradually abandoned around AD 1400. Archaeological evidence suggests no sudden catastrophe. Instead, the departure appears to have unfolded gradually over time. Extended droughts, changing rainfall patterns, environmental pressures, and shifting social relationships probably contributed to population movements throughout the Verde Valley. Rather than disappearing, the descendants of these communities almost certainly became part of larger indigenous populations elsewhere in the Southwest. Still, many details remain uncertain. What conversations took place as families decided to leave homes their ancestors had occupied for centuries? How much knowledge, tradition, and ceremony traveled with them, and how much remained tied forever to the cliffs they left behind? The site has also inspired discussions regarding astronomy and ceremonial observation. Some researchers have suggested that the dwelling's orientation may relate to seasonal sunlight or important points within the annual solar cycle. While these ideas remain less firmly established than at certain Pueblo ceremonial centers, they reflect the broader pattern of careful environmental observation documented throughout the ancient Southwest. More speculative theories occasionally extend even further. Some writers propose that Montezuma Castle formed part of a network of sacred sites connected through symbolic geography, while others argue that hidden chambers or undiscovered structures remain concealed within the surrounding cliffs. Although archaeological evidence has yet to support these claims, they illustrate the enduring fascination inspired by a settlement that seems almost impossible even today. As evening shadows slowly climb the limestone wall, Montezuma Castle appears much as it did centuries ago, quietly overlooking the waters of Beaver Creek. Empty doorways still face the valley where fields once flourished and families carried out the rhythms of everyday life. The remarkable engineering of the cliff dwelling speaks clearly of human ingenuity, yet its deepest stories remain unwritten. High above the canyon floor, the ancient rooms continue to wait in silence, leaving us to wonder whether their greatest secrets lie not within the walls themselves, but in the choices of the people who once called this extraordinary place home. The cliff dwellings of Montezuma Castle reveal how entire communities adapted to landscapes that offered both protection and opportunity. Yet, farther north, on the broad mesas of southwestern Colorado, another settlement presents a quieter puzzle. Here, there are no towering cliffs or dramatic canyon walls. Instead, the remains of Goodman Point Pueblo rise gently from the earth, their weathered foundations marking the place where one of the largest communities in the region once flourished, before slipping into silence. At first light, the mesa is filled with a calm stillness. Grasses ripple beneath the wind, pinyon pines and junipers dot the rolling landscape, and distant mountains stand against the horizon. Nothing immediately suggests that this peaceful setting once supported hundreds of people. Only as the outlines of ancient stone walls begin to emerge from the ground does the scale of the settlement become apparent. Carefully arranged room blocks, low masonry foundations, and scattered pottery fragments hint at a thriving community whose story remains only partially understood. Goodman Point Pueblo is part of what archaeologists call the Goodman Point Unit of Hovenweep National Monument, although it differs significantly from the better-known stone towers found elsewhere within the monument. Rather than emphasizing defensive-looking towers, Goodman Point developed as a substantial Pueblo community occupied primarily during the late Pueblo III period, roughly between AD 1260 and 1285. Although the settlement existed for only a few decades in its final form, it became one of the largest villages in the northern San Juan region. Its rapid growth is one of the site's first mysteries. Archaeological evidence suggests that families from surrounding communities gradually moved into Goodman Point during the late 13th century. Smaller villages across the region were being abandoned, while larger population centers expanded. Stone by stone, new room blocks were added until the settlement contained hundreds of rooms surrounding plazas, storage areas, and ceremonial structures known as kivas. What encouraged so many people to gather here within such a relatively short period? Environmental pressures may provide part of the answer. During the 1200s, prolonged drought affected much of the American Southwest. Agricultural production became increasingly uncertain as rainfall patterns shifted and growing seasons shortened. Consolidating into larger communities may have allowed families to share labor, pool resources, strengthen social ties, and better manage the risks associated with unpredictable harvests. Yet, Goodman Point itself occupied productive land. The surrounding mesa offered fertile soil suitable for cultivating corn, beans, and squash, while nearby forests supplied timber, fuel, wild plants, and game. Springs and seasonal water sources supported daily life despite the region's generally dry climate. The settlement appears to have been carefully positioned within an environment capable of sustaining a substantial population. Excavations have uncovered finely crafted pottery, stone tools, weaving implements, food storage rooms, and evidence of extensive domestic activity. These discoveries reveal a community engaged in farming, hunting, textile production, and long-distance exchange. Pottery styles demonstrate cultural connections with neighboring Pueblo communities stretching across southwestern Colorado, southeastern Utah, northwestern New Mexico, and northeastern Arizona. Goodman Point did not exist in isolation. Instead, it formed part of an interconnected cultural landscape where ideas, traditions, technologies, and ceremonial practices circulated continuously between settlements. Roads and footpaths likely connected neighboring villages, allowing families to maintain relationships extending well beyond the boundaries of any single community. One of the most intriguing aspects of Goodman Point concerns its organization. Unlike settlements that developed gradually over centuries, portions of Goodman Point appear to have been planned with remarkable consistency. Room blocks follow organized layouts surrounding open plazas, while kivas occupy carefully integrated positions within the community. Such planning suggests coordinated construction rather than purely spontaneous growth. Did local leaders oversee the expansion, or did families cooperate through shared decision-making rooted in long-standing Pueblo traditions? Archaeology reveals the physical results, but offers only limited insight into the social processes behind them. The settlement also reflects broader cultural changes unfolding throughout the northern Southwest during the late 13th century. Defensive concerns appear to have increased in certain regions, while competition for resources may have intensified as environmental conditions became less predictable. Some communities selected naturally protected locations, while others emphasized larger, more closely connected villages capable of mutual support. Even so, Goodman Point shows relatively little direct evidence of widespread warfare. Instead, the greatest mystery lies in its remarkably brief occupation. By approximately AD 1285, the Pueblo had been largely abandoned. This pattern mirrors events occurring across much of the Mesa Verde region. Entire communities gradually relocated southward toward the Rio Grande Valley, the Hopi Mesas, and other Pueblo homelands where their descendants continue to live today. Tree ring studies indicate that prolonged drought almost certainly contributed to these migrations, but climate alone cannot fully explain the movement of thousands of people across such vast distances. Social change likely played an equally important role. Political relationships evolved, ceremonial traditions adapted, trade networks shifted, and communities sought new opportunities within changing environments. Rather than representing collapse, many archaeologists now interpret these migrations as carefully organized relocations, preserving cultural continuity under increasingly difficult conditions. Still, many deeply human questions remain unanswered. How were these decisions discussed within the plazas of Goodman Point? Did families know they would never return? Were departures gradual, with small groups leaving over many seasons, or did entire neighborhoods relocate together after collective decisions? The archaeological record preserves walls, pottery, and tools, but conversations, emotions, and intentions rarely survive. Researchers have also examined the possibility that Goodman Point's layout incorporated symbolic relationships with surrounding landmarks or celestial events. Certain architectural orientations may reflect observations of seasonal sunrise and sunset positions important for agriculture and ceremonial life. While evidence remains suggestive rather than definitive, such possibilities fit within the broader tradition of Pueblo communities carefully integrating architecture with both landscape and the rhythms of the sky. More speculative interpretations occasionally venture further, proposing that Goodman Point formed part of an extensive ceremonial network linking major Pueblo settlements through sacred geography or encoded landscape design. Others suggest that unexcavated portions of the site may still conceal important structures capable of reshaping our understanding of the community. Although these ideas remain unproven, ongoing archaeological work continues to reveal new details about the settlement every decade. Today, Goodman Point rests quietly beneath open skies, its low stone walls blending almost seamlessly into the surrounding mesa. Unlike towering cliff dwellings or monumental ceremonial buildings, its presence is understated, requiring patience to fully appreciate. Yet, beneath those weathered foundations lies the story of a community that briefly became one of the region's most important gathering places before its people chose a different future. Whether every reason behind that remarkable migration will ever be fully understood remains uncertain, leaving the silent stones to preserve questions that continue to echo across the high desert landscape. The quiet foundations of Goodman Point Pueblo remind us that even thriving communities can leave behind more questions than answers. Yet, sometimes the greatest archaeological mysteries are not preserved in towering walls or abandoned villages, but in places so modest that they might easily be overlooked. Deep within the dry, volcanic landscape of the American Northwest, a series of shallow caves has transformed our understanding of the earliest chapters of human history in North America, and continues to inspire one of archaeology's most carefully debated investigations. The Paisley Caves lie in the high desert of south-central Oregon, where broad sagebrush plains stretch toward distant mountains beneath an immense sky. Carved into ancient volcanic rock overlooking the Summer Lake Basin, the caves appear unremarkable at first glance. Their entrances are small, their interiors modest, offering little hint that these shelters have quietly preserved evidence spanning thousands of years. Wind carries fine desert dust across the surrounding landscape, while silence settles over the cliffs much as it did for the earliest people who sought refuge here. Unlike monumental archaeological sites shaped by impressive architecture, the significance of Paisley Caves lies almost entirely beneath the surface. Layer upon layer of sediment accumulated inside the caves over millennia, creating a remarkably detailed record of changing environments, animal life, and human activity. Each undisturbed layer acts almost like a page in an ancient archive, preserving traces of lives that would otherwise have disappeared completely. For decades, archaeologists believed that the earliest widely accepted inhabitants of North America belonged to what became known as the Clovis culture, recognized by its distinctive stone spear points dating to roughly 13,000 years ago. According to this long-standing model, Clovis represented the continent's first widespread human population. Paisley Caves challenged that assumption. Beginning in the early 2000s, careful excavations uncovered evidence suggesting that humans may have occupied the caves even earlier than the Clovis period. Among the most remarkable discoveries were preserved human coprolites, ancient fossilized feces, found deep within securely dated archaeological layers. Although unusual, such remains provide an extraordinary source of scientific information. They preserve microscopic evidence of diet, environment, parasites, and, in exceptionally favorable conditions, fragments of ancient human DNA. Radiocarbon dating placed several of these specimens at approximately 14,000 years old, potentially predating the traditional Clovis timeline by nearly 1,000 years. If the dating proved accurate, the implications would be profound. Did people reach North America earlier than previously believed? The findings immediately attracted worldwide attention. Genetic analysis identified mitochondrial DNA consistent with human origin, while surrounding sediments contained stone tools, butchered animal bones, woven plant fibers, and other signs of human activity. Together, these discoveries suggested that people occupied the caves long before the appearance of classic Clovis technology. Yet, extraordinary claims require extraordinary scrutiny. Almost immediately, researchers began examining alternative explanations. Could younger genetic material have seeped downward through older sediments? Had burrowing animals disturbed the archaeological layers? Were the coprolites truly human, or might they belong to another species contaminated by later DNA? These questions sparked years of careful scientific debate. Unlike many archaeological controversies driven by speculation, the discussion surrounding Paisley Caves unfolded through detailed laboratory analysis, repeated testing, and independent review. Researchers re-examined sediment layers, refined radiocarbon dates, analyzed microscopic mineral deposits, and evaluated possible sources of contamination. Over time, additional studies strengthened confidence that the caves genuinely preserve evidence of human occupation predating Clovis, although discussions continue regarding the precise interpretation of every discovery. The broader implications extend far beyond a single site. If people occupied Paisley Caves more than 14,000 years ago, they must have entered North America through routes different from those traditionally proposed. During portions of the last ice age, massive continental ice sheets blocked much of the interior of the continent. Some archaeologists therefore suggest that early populations may have traveled along the Pacific coastline, moving south by boat or following coastal environments that provided abundant marine resources. Unfortunately, much of that ancient coastline now lies beneath rising sea levels following the end of the Ice Age, making direct archaeological evidence extremely difficult to recover. Paisley Caves therefore occupy a particularly important position within this ongoing investigation. The caves also preserve evidence of changing climates stretching back thousands of years. Fossilized remains of extinct animals, ancient plant materials, pollen, and environmental sediments document dramatic transformations as the region shifted from Ice Age ecosystems toward the modern high desert. Human occupation unfolded against this constantly changing landscape, requiring remarkable adaptability as resources, temperatures, and wildlife evolved over successive generations. Stone tools recovered from the site differ in important ways from classic Clovis technology. Rather than displaying the distinctive fluted spear points long associated with North America's earliest inhabitants, many artifacts reflect simpler tool-making traditions. This observation has encouraged some researchers to reconsider whether multiple populations with different technological traditions may have entered the continent independently. Could several groups have explored North America at different times, following different routes and adapting in different ways? The archaeological record increasingly suggests a more complex story than earlier models allowed. Naturally, discoveries of this significance have also inspired more speculative interpretations. Some writers propose that Paisley Caves represent only one surviving fragment of a much older migration, whose primary evidence has disappeared beneath coastal waters. Others suggest that entirely unknown populations may have reached the Americas long before currently accepted dates. While such possibilities remain subjects of ongoing investigation rather than established fact, they illustrate how one relatively small site has reshaped discussions about an entire continent's earliest human history. Today, the caves remain quiet beneath Oregon's open skies, their modest entrances revealing little of the extraordinary discoveries concealed within. They remind us that history is not always rewritten by towering monuments or spectacular treasures. Sometimes, the most important clues survive in the smallest traces, preserved patiently beneath layers of dust until careful science uncovers them. Even now, every new excavation raises fresh questions, suggesting that the earliest footsteps into North America may still be waiting to emerge from the silence of the caves. The discoveries within Paisley Caves demonstrate that history often changes through the smallest pieces of evidence. A fragment of DNA, a layer of sediment, or a simple stone tool can challenge ideas accepted for generations. Far to the south, another archaeological site presents a different kind of puzzle. Not about the first arrival of people, but about a thriving community that became the focus of one of the earliest encounters between indigenous North America and European explorers. Its silent ruins still preserve echoes of a meeting that transformed history, while leaving many of its own questions unanswered. Across the broad, high desert of western New Mexico, where mesas rise above open grasslands and distant mountains frame the horizon, lie the weathered remains of Hawikku. At first glance, the site appears as little more than low stone walls scattered across the landscape. Yet, centuries ago, this was one of the largest and most influential Zuni pueblos, home to hundreds, perhaps even thousands of people who lived within carefully constructed multi-story buildings clustered around open plazas and ceremonial spaces. The settlement flourished long before Europeans entered the region. Archaeological evidence suggests that Hawikku was established by the ancestral Zuni people sometime during the late Pueblo period, likely by the early 1200s, following migrations from earlier communities throughout the Four Corners region. Families who had gradually moved south from places such as Mesa Verde and neighboring settlements carried with them architectural traditions, farming knowledge, religious practices, and social structures that continued to evolve within their new homeland. Built from sandstone blocks joined with adobe mortar, Hawikku expanded into a densely organized community. Multi-level room blocks surrounded plazas where daily life unfolded through trade, craft production, ceremonies, and agricultural planning. Nearby fields produced corn, beans, squash, and cotton, supported by careful knowledge of seasonal rainfall and local water sources. Pottery workshops, weaving, stone tool production, and trade connected Hawikku with neighboring Pueblo communities and distant cultures throughout the Southwest. Yet, Hawikku's importance extends beyond archaeology alone. In 1540, the Pueblo became one of the first indigenous settlements encountered by the expedition led by the Spanish explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado during his search for the legendary Seven Cities of Cibola. European accounts described prosperous pueblos whose wealth had been greatly exaggerated by stories carried north through earlier expeditions. Expecting magnificent cities filled with gold, Coronado instead encountered thriving agricultural communities built of stone and adobe. The meeting quickly turned violent. Historical records indicate that Hawikku resisted the expedition before Spanish forces entered the settlement after a brief but intense confrontation. Although European chronicles describe the encounter from their own perspective, indigenous oral traditions preserve memories emphasizing the disruption, conflict, and profound cultural consequences that followed. Together, these different sources remind us that history is rarely preserved through a single voice. The archaeological evidence adds important detail while also raising new questions. Excavations have uncovered domestic structures, ceremonial kivas, storage rooms, pottery, trade goods, and later European materials introduced after contact. These discoveries reveal a community adapting to enormous social changes while maintaining many long-standing cultural traditions. Rather than disappearing immediately after European arrival, Hawikku continued to be occupied for decades, becoming part of a complex period marked by negotiation, resistance, accommodation, and cultural resilience. One enduring mystery concerns the settlement's overall organization. Although archaeologists have mapped much of the visible architecture, important portions remain unexcavated. The arrangement of plazas, ceremonial areas, and residential compounds suggests careful planning developed over generations. Yet, many details regarding political leadership, community decision-making, and religious life remain known primarily through later ethnographic comparison rather than direct archaeological evidence. How closely did everyday life at Hawikku resemble that of earlier Pueblo communities? And how rapidly did those traditions begin to change following sustained European contact? The answers remain incomplete, Another question involves the remarkable continuity of Zuni culture itself. While Hawikku was eventually abandoned during the late 17th century, the Zuni people did not disappear. Instead, they relocated to other pueblos that continue to exist today. This continuity provides archaeologists with valuable cultural context while also encouraging respectful recognition that Hawikku represents the ancestral homeland of a living people rather than the remains of a vanished civilization. Researchers continue to study the reasons behind the settlement's eventual abandonment. European diseases, introduced livestock, changing political alliances, missionary activity, environmental pressures, and the upheavals surrounding the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 all reshaped life throughout the Southwest. Hawikku was likely affected by several of these forces simultaneously. Rather than reflecting sudden collapse, its abandonment appears to represent another stage in the long process of adaptation that has characterized Pueblo history for centuries. The surrounding landscape also invites reflection. Hawikku occupies a strategic position within the Zuni homeland, where mesas, springs, and distant mountain peaks carry both practical and cultural significance. Some researchers suggest that the placement of important pueblos reflects relationships with sacred landmarks embedded within traditional belief systems. Although many ceremonial traditions remain appropriately protected within the Zuni community, archaeology increasingly recognizes that settlements like Hawikku cannot be fully understood without considering their broader cultural landscape. As with many prominent archaeological sites, more speculative theories occasionally emerge. Some writers have suggested that Hawikku concealed legendary treasures sought by early Spanish expeditions, or that undiscovered chambers remain buried beneath the ruins. Others argue that the settlement preserves evidence of sophisticated astronomical alignments still awaiting full recognition. While ongoing research continues to reveal new details, direct archaeological evidence has not confirmed these more ambitious claims. Today, Hawikku rests quietly beneath the New Mexico sky, its weathered stones standing as witnesses to centuries of change. The plazas where families once gathered have grown silent, yet the site's significance endures through both archaeology and the living traditions of the Zuni people. Every foundation preserves traces of resilience, adaptation, and continuity, while the unanswered questions surrounding its earliest years, its transformation after European contact, and the full richness of its ceremonial life continue to remind us that some chapters of history reveal themselves only gradually, inviting each new generation to look a little more closely. The weathered walls of Hawikku remind us that history is often shaped not only by the rise and fall of settlements, but also by the enduring resilience of the people connected to them. Yet, farther west, tucked within the rugged mountain landscapes of eastern Arizona, another ancient pueblo tells a quieter story. Here, among broad valleys and pine-covered ridges, the ruins of Kinishba preserve the memory of a flourishing community whose remarkable architecture still raises questions about its purpose, its people, and the forces that ultimately led them to leave. Surrounded by the White Mountains, Kinishba occupies a landscape very different from the arid deserts often associated with the ancient Southwest. Streams flow through fertile valleys, seasonal rains nourish grasses and forests, and cooler temperatures create an environment capable of supporting both agriculture and abundant wildlife. The setting offered resources that were comparatively rare elsewhere in the region, making it an attractive location for settlement over many centuries. Today, only portions of the pueblo remain standing. Low masonry walls trace the outlines of what was once a substantial community, while reconstructed sections hint at the impressive scale the settlement originally possessed. From a distance, the ruins seem almost inseparable from the surrounding earth, their weathered stones blending naturally into the hillside after centuries of exposure to wind, rain, and changing seasons. Archaeologists associate Kinishba with the ancestors of the Western Apache as well as the Mogollon cultural tradition that flourished throughout parts of Arizona and New Mexico. The Pueblo reached its greatest development between approximately AD 1200 and 1400, during a period of remarkable cultural interaction throughout the Southwest. By that time, communities across the region were connected through extensive trade networks, shared religious traditions, and the movement of ideas between distant settlements. Kinishba itself was an impressive achievement. At its height, the Pueblo is believed to have contained more than 400 rooms arranged in large, interconnected blocks surrounding open plazas. Multi-story buildings constructed from carefully fitted stone masonry created a dense residential complex capable of housing several hundred inhabitants. Storage rooms, living quarters, ceremonial spaces, and communal gathering areas formed an organized settlement reflecting generations of architectural knowledge. Building on such a scale required careful planning. Stone had to be quarried and transported. Timber was harvested from nearby forests for roofing beams. Mud mortar bound each carefully placed wall together, while successive generations expanded the Pueblo as the community continued to grow. Every addition reflected cooperation extending beyond individual families, suggesting a society capable of organizing large-scale construction projects through shared effort and long-term planning. Excavations have uncovered pottery, stone tools, weaving implements, shell ornaments, and finely crafted artifacts revealing a prosperous community engaged in agriculture, hunting, and regional exchange. Corn, beans, squash, and cotton formed the agricultural foundation of daily life, supported by nearby streams and productive soils. Obsidian, turquoise, shells from the Pacific coast, and copper objects originating far to the south demonstrate that Kinishba participated in commercial networks stretching across much of the American Southwest. These discoveries reveal a community that was far from isolated. Instead, Kinishba occupied an important position within a dynamic landscape where knowledge, materials, and ceremonial traditions circulated between neighboring cultures. Architectural similarities connect the settlement with both Mogollon and ancestral Pueblo traditions, while certain pottery styles reflect influences from multiple regions. This blending of cultural characteristics raises one of the site's most intriguing questions. Who exactly were the builders of Kinishba? Archaeologists generally describe the settlement as part of the Mogollon cultural tradition. Yet, the archaeological record reveals evidence of interaction with neighboring Pueblo communities as well. Rather than representing a single isolated society, Kinishba appears to illustrate how cultural boundaries throughout the Southwest were often fluid, shaped by migration, trade, intermarriage, and shared religious practices. Instead of rigid divisions, the region may have functioned as a network of interconnected communities adapting together over generations. The Pueblo's layout also invites investigation. Large plazas occupy central positions within the settlement, suggesting spaces where communal activities, ceremonies, markets, or seasonal gatherings may have taken place. Several ceremonial rooms resembling kivas have also been identified, although their exact functions continue to be studied. Religious life undoubtedly played an important role within the community, but the details remain largely beyond the reach of archaeology alone. What beliefs united the families who gathered within these plazas? How were important decisions made? Who coordinated construction, agriculture, trade, and ceremonial life? Stone walls preserve the physical framework of the settlement, but they remained silent regarding the conversations, traditions, and social relationships that once animated those spaces. Perhaps the greatest mystery concerns Kinishba's abandonment. By approximately AD 1400, the Pueblo was largely deserted. This pattern closely mirrors developments occurring throughout much of the Southwest, where numerous settlements experienced gradual population movement during the late 13th and early 14th centuries. Archaeological evidence points toward environmental pressures as one important factor. Prolonged drought, fluctuating rainfall, changing growing conditions, and increasing demands upon local resources likely affected agricultural stability throughout the region. Yet, environmental change alone rarely explains complex human decisions. Political relationships evolved. Trade routes shifted. Communities reorganized. New alliances formed while older centers declined. Rather than representing sudden collapse, many archaeologists now view these migrations as carefully managed adaptations, responding to changing circumstances over several generations. The surrounding landscape may also have influenced the settlement in ways not yet fully understood. Researchers have noted that Kinishba occupies a position offering broad visibility across nearby valleys while remaining close to dependable water sources and fertile farmland. Some have explored whether nearby mountain peaks or seasonal solar observations influenced the orientation of particular structures, although direct evidence for intentional astronomical design remains limited. Such possibilities continue to be investigated alongside broader studies examining how ancient communities integrated architecture with natural landscapes. As with many important archaeological sites, more speculative theories occasionally emerge. Some writers have proposed that Kinishba served as a major ceremonial center, connecting multiple cultures throughout the Southwest, while others suggest that undiscovered chambers or unexcavated portions of the Pueblo may still conceal important evidence capable of reshaping its history. Although such ideas remain unconfirmed, they reflect the continuing fascination inspired by a settlement whose full story has yet to be recovered. Today, Kinishba rests quietly beneath the White Mountains, surrounded by forests, grasslands, and the same changing seasons that once shaped the lives of its builders. The carefully laid stones still trace the outlines of homes, gathering places and ceremonial spaces where generations lived, worked, and planned for the future. Much has been learned from the Pueblo over the past century, yet many of its deepest questions remain unanswered. Every weathered wall invites us to look beyond the visible ruins and consider how much of the community's knowledge, traditions, and history may still lie hidden, not beneath the earth alone, but within stories that time has only partially allowed us to recover. The enduring walls of Kinishba remind us that even the largest pueblos were only one part of an immense network of communities stretching across the American Southwest. Some settlements thrived in sheltered valleys, while others stood at the crossroads of trade routes that connected distant cultures separated by deserts, mountains, and open plains. Few places illustrate that interconnected world more clearly than Pecos Pueblo, where centuries of commerce, diplomacy, ceremony, and cultural exchange unfolded before the settlement gradually slipped into silence. High on the rolling grasslands at the eastern edge of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, in what is now northern New Mexico, the ruins of Pecos Pueblo overlook a landscape unlike the deserts commonly associated with the ancient Southwest. Broad valleys stretch toward distant horizons, interrupted by forests of ponderosa pine and seasonal streams descending from the mountains. To the east begin the vast Great Plains, while to the west lie the Pueblo communities of the Rio Grande Valley. For generations, Pecos occupied one of the most strategically important locations in North America. Even today, the setting conveys a quiet sense of purpose. The remains of thick adobe and stone walls rise gently above the surrounding hills, while the weathered ruins of a later Spanish mission stand beside the older Pueblo foundations. Together, these structures represent centuries of cultural continuity, adaptation, conflict, and cooperation layered upon the same landscape. Every wall reflects a different chapter in a story that stretches far beyond a single community. Archaeological evidence suggests that Pecos Pueblo developed during the early Pueblo IV period, probably around AD 1300, although earlier occupation existed nearby long before the construction of the large settlement visible today. Over time, families from smaller surrounding villages gradually gathered into an increasingly important regional center. The pueblo expanded into a massive multi-story complex containing hundreds of interconnected rooms, surrounding plazas and ceremonial spaces. At its height, Pecos may have supported well over 1,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest pueblo communities in the northern Southwest. Its success depended largely upon geography. Pecos stood at the meeting point of two remarkably different worlds. To the west lived pueblo farming communities whose fields produced corn, beans, squash, and cotton. To the east stretched the Great Plains, home to hunting societies following vast herds of bison. Pecos became a bridge between these environments, allowing goods, technologies, and ideas to flow across enormous distances. Turquoise, pottery, woven textiles, and agricultural products moved eastward. Bison hides, meat, salt, and other valuable resources traveled westward. This exchange transformed Pecos into one of the Southwest's great commercial centers. Excavations have uncovered evidence of this extraordinary trade. Pottery from distant pueblo communities appears alongside plains materials, marine shells carried inland from the Pacific coast, copper objects originating far to the south, obsidian from volcanic regions, and countless everyday tools reflecting centuries of continuous occupation. These discoveries reveal a settlement deeply connected to neighboring cultures rather than isolated behind its own walls. Yet commerce was only part of the story. Large ceremonial kivas occupied important positions within the pueblo, indicating that religious life played a central role in community identity. Circular, subterranean chambers served as places where ceremonies, instruction, and communal gatherings reinforced traditions passed from one generation to the next. Although descendant pueblo communities continue to preserve aspects of these traditions today, many details appropriately remain protected within living cultural knowledge rather than public archaeology. The organization of Pecos raises intriguing questions. How was such a large and diverse community governed? Managing agriculture, trade, construction, diplomacy, and ceremonial responsibilities required careful coordination. Hundreds of rooms, shared storage facilities, communal plazas, and public architecture suggest sophisticated social organization. Yet, archaeology cannot easily reveal the leadership structures behind these achievements. Were important decisions made through councils of respected elders? Did religious leaders guide political life? Or did authority emerge through cooperation among extended families whose relationships evolved over generations? The answers remain largely beyond the reach of excavation. When Spanish expeditions entered the region during the 16th century, Pecos quickly became one of the first major pueblo communities encountered. Historical records describe a prosperous settlement already well established before European arrival. Unlike many archaeological sites whose histories rely entirely upon material remains, Pecos exists within both archaeology and written documentation, allowing researchers to compare physical evidence with colonial accounts. Even so, those written sources present their own challenges. Spanish chroniclers observed Pueblo society through unfamiliar cultural perspectives, often misunderstanding customs, political relationships, and religious practices. Indigenous oral traditions preserve different memories emphasizing resilience, adaptation, and continuity, rather than solely the dramatic events recorded in European documents. Together, these complementary sources create a richer, but also more complicated, picture of the past. Following European contact, life at Pecos changed profoundly. Missionaries established churches near the pueblo. New livestock transformed the surrounding landscape. European diseases dramatically reduced indigenous populations throughout the Southwest. Trade networks expanded while political alliances shifted. Periods of cooperation alternated with conflict, culminating in events such as the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, when many Pueblo communities united in resistance against Spanish colonial rule. Remarkably, Pecos endured through these transformations for generations. Yet, by the early 19th century, the community had entered a long period of decline. Population gradually decreased through disease, migration, changing trade patterns, and increasing political pressures. Families slowly relocated to neighboring Pueblo communities where traditions could continue within stronger populations. In 1838, the remaining residents of Pecos formally joined the Pueblo of Jemez, carrying with them ceremonial knowledge, language, and cultural identity that survives today. The settlement itself was never violently erased. Instead, it experienced a gradual transition extending across centuries, a reminder that history often unfolds through slow adaptation rather than sudden collapse. Researchers continue to investigate many aspects of the site. Excavations have revealed multiple construction phases, demonstrating that the Pueblo evolved continuously rather than following a single architectural plan. Rooms were expanded, walls rebuilt, plazas reorganized, and ceremonial spaces modified as the community adapted to changing needs. Each generation left subtle alterations that together form an extraordinarily complex archaeological record. Some investigators have also examined possible astronomical relationships incorporated into the settlement's design. Certain architectural orientations may reflect observations of seasonal sunrise or sunset positions important for agriculture and ceremonial life. While direct evidence remains less conclusive than at some other Pueblo sites, the possibility reflects a broader pattern throughout the Southwest, where communities often integrated architecture with careful observation of the natural world. Naturally, Pecos has also inspired more speculative interpretations. Because of its role as a crossroads connecting distant cultures, some writers have proposed that the Pueblo possessed political influence extending far beyond what archaeology can presently demonstrate. Others suggest that important ceremonial chambers remain undiscovered beneath unexcavated portions of the site, or that hidden traditions connecting Pueblo and plain societies have yet to be fully recognized. Although such ideas remain unconfirmed, they reflect the remarkable complexity of a settlement whose significance continues to grow with each new discovery. Today, the quiet ruins of Pecos Pueblo overlook the same broad valleys where traders, farmers, hunters, pilgrims, and travelers once crossed paths for centuries. Wind moves through the weathered adobe walls, carrying echoes of countless conversations that shaped one of the Southwest's most influential communities. The stones preserve evidence of remarkable resilience, adaptation, and cultural continuity. Yet, they also remind us that some of history's greatest mysteries are not about how civilizations disappeared, but how their traditions survived, transformed, and continued long after the buildings themselves had fallen silent. The quiet plazas of Pecos Pueblo remind us that ancient communities often looked beyond the horizon, connecting distant cultures through trade, ceremony, and shared knowledge. Yet, some places seem to have connected something even greater, the rhythms of the earth with the movements of the sky. Deep within the vast landscape of Chaco Canyon stands a solitary sandstone mesa, whose silent summit has become the focus of one of the most fascinating debates in North American archaeology. It is known as Fajada Butte, and hidden among its weathered rocks is a phenomenon that continues to challenge our understanding of the people who built one of the continent's greatest ceremonial landscapes. Rising nearly 400 feet above the floor of Chaco Canyon in what is now northwestern New Mexico, Fajada Butte dominates the surrounding desert with an unmistakable presence. Its steep sandstone cliffs catch the changing light from dawn until dusk, shifting from pale gold to deep crimson as the day unfolds. Visible from nearly every part of the canyon, the butte appears less like an isolated hill than a natural monument placed deliberately at the center of the landscape. For centuries, the people who lived within Chaco Canyon would have seen its towering silhouette every day. The climb to the summit is demanding. Narrow ledges wind upward along exposed rock faces before reaching a relatively small plateau overlooking the canyon below. The panoramic view extends for miles in every direction, revealing the carefully planned arrangement of great houses, ceremonial kivas, ancient roads, and distant mesas that together formed one of the most sophisticated cultural centers in prehistoric North America. Near the summit lies a modest rock shelter that, at first glance, appears almost insignificant. 3 large sandstone slabs lean naturally against the cliff, creating a narrow gap through which sunlight passes during certain times of the year. Behind these slabs is a panel of carefully carved spiral petroglyphs, simple in appearance, yet among the most intensely studied rock carvings in North America. The site became internationally known during the late 20th century, after artist Anna Sophia documented an extraordinary pattern of sunlight interacting with the spirals. On the summer solstice, a narrow shaft of sunlight, often called the sun dagger, passes directly through the center of the larger spiral. During the winter solstice, 2 separate beams frame the spiral from opposite sides. At the spring and autumn equinoxes, different patterns of light cross portions of the carvings in remarkably consistent ways. The effect is both subtle and mesmerizing. For only a brief period each year, sunlight transforms the rock panel into what appears to be a carefully timed celestial display. The immediate question seems almost unavoidable. Was this alignment intentional? Many archaeologists believe it was. If deliberately created, the sun dagger would represent one of the most sophisticated examples of prehistoric astronomical observation ever documented in North America. It would demonstrate that the Chacoan people not only observed the annual movement of the sun with remarkable precision, but also incorporated that knowledge into carefully selected locations within their ceremonial landscape. Such knowledge would have carried practical importance. Agricultural societies depended upon understanding seasonal change. Solstices and equinoxes marked critical moments within the annual cycle of planting, harvesting, and ceremonial activity. Long before mechanical calendars or written almanacs existed, careful observation of the heavens allowed communities to organize both practical and religious life around predictable celestial events. Yet Fajada Butte may have represented something far greater than a calendar alone. Throughout Chaco Canyon, researchers have documented numerous architectural alignments involving solar and lunar cycles. Several great houses appear oriented toward significant celestial events, while roads, shrines, and prominent landforms seem carefully integrated into the surrounding geography. Fajada Butte occupies a commanding position within this larger landscape, suggesting that it may have served as one component of a remarkably sophisticated ceremonial system extending across the canyon. One particularly intriguing possibility involves the moon. Unlike the sun's annual cycle, the moon follows a far more complex pattern known as the 18.6-year lunar standstill cycle. Some researchers have proposed that certain Chacoan structures align not only with the sun, but also with these long-term lunar movements. If correct, such observations would imply generations of patient astronomical record-keeping, requiring careful measurements passed from one generation to the next. Could the builders of Chaco Canyon have tracked celestial movements over decades? The precision required would certainly demand sustained observation, careful teaching, and an enduring cultural commitment to preserving astronomical knowledge. Not every researcher, however, agrees on the interpretation. Some scholars caution that naturally occurring rock formations can occasionally produce striking alignments by coincidence. Although the sun dagger phenomenon is unquestionably real, debate continues regarding whether the sandstone slabs were deliberately positioned or whether ancient observers simply recognized an existing natural feature and incorporated it into their ceremonial practices. This distinction is important. If the slabs were intentionally arranged, the site represents an extraordinary feat of engineering combined with astronomical expertise. If they formed naturally, the achievement remains equally impressive in another sense. Recognizing such a rare alignment and integrating it into religious and ceremonial life would still demonstrate remarkable observational skill and deep familiarity with the surrounding environment. Unfortunately, modern visitors unintentionally altered the site. During the decades following its discovery, increasing numbers of people climbed to the summit. The additional weight gradually shifted portions of the fragile sandstone slabs by small but significant amounts. Today, the famous light patterns no longer fall exactly as they once did, and public access to the Sun Dagger has been restricted in order to preserve what remains of this exceptionally delicate location. Ironically, the very attention generated by the discovery contributed to changing the phenomenon itself. The spiral carvings surrounding the light display also remain subjects of careful study. Spiral symbols appear widely throughout the rock art of the American Southwest, often interpreted as representing journeys, water, cycles of life, migration, or celestial movement. Yet no universal explanation exists. Meanings almost certainly varied between communities and across generations. At Fajada Butte, the relationship between the spirals and the moving sunlight encourages further questions. Did the carvings simply mark astronomical observations? Were they part of ceremonies performed only during specific moments of the year? Or did they express ideas about time, renewal, and humanity's relationship with the cosmos that modern archaeology can only partly reconstruct? The Butte itself adds another layer of mystery. More than 200 archaeological features have been documented on its summit, including room blocks, small structures, shrines, and additional petroglyphs. These discoveries indicate that the summit was visited repeatedly over centuries, rather than serving as an isolated observation point used only occasionally. Why invest such effort climbing this steep mesa again and again? Perhaps the ascent itself held symbolic meaning. Many cultures associate elevated places with spiritual significance, viewing mountains and high points as locations where the human and celestial worlds draw closer together. The difficult climb to Fajada Butte may therefore have formed part of ceremonial activities whose deeper meanings are no longer preserved within the archaeological record. Naturally, a site as remarkable as the Sun Dagger has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some writers have proposed that Fajada Butte functioned as the center of a continent-wide network of astronomical observatories, while others suggest that its alignments preserve mathematical or cosmological knowledge far beyond what conventional archaeology currently recognizes. A few have even argued that undiscovered chambers remain concealed within the Butte itself. Although these ideas remain unsupported by direct archaeological evidence, they reflect the enduring fascination inspired by a place where light, stone, and time appear to converge with extraordinary precision. Today, Fajada Butte continues to rise above Chaco Canyon much as it has for countless centuries. The sandstone still catches the changing light, the spiral carvings remain etched into the rock, and the desert sky follows the same celestial rhythms observed by generations of Chacuan people long before written history reached the region. Whether the Sun Dagger represents deliberate engineering, extraordinary observation of natural phenomena, or a combination of both, it stands as one of archaeology's most compelling reminders that some of the greatest achievements of the ancient world were measured not in monuments alone, but in a profound understanding of the heavens whose full meaning may still lie just beyond our reach.